The Lord of Mages, I ruined the tech tree. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 176, Antolia crosses the Chillon River 3 times. Bull Cavalry. As a time traveler, Leon thought riding a bull on the battlefield would be somewhat funny. Throughout the history of the Earth, Leon could hardly find a precedent for riding a bull to fight. Firstly, it was probably because the speed of a bull was difficult to compare with that of a horse, and secondly, it was because the bull had a stubborn temper, so the so-called stubborn bull and stubborn bull got its name from this. But this is not the Earth. The magic factors in the air and the thick black fog in the abandoned land, all of which made this world full of infinite possibilities. Moreover, the records in the papyrus have never been deviated. The so-called ignorance is ignorance. When encountering an unknown problem, scientific instruments will immediately go on strike, and will never talk nonsense like some artificial retards, let alone write a solution on the test paper in a pretentious manner. Therefore, Leon has a deep expectation for the bull cavalry of Antolia. The only problem is, in the abandoned land filled with black fog, is there really a creature like Edgar Bull? This was exactly why Leon was a little irritated before. Yes, during the existence of the Agar's Empire, the existence of the bull cavalry was once a great force, but as the black fog spread, even humans with wisdom had to find another place to live. Perhaps only the stubborn elves who possessed the world tree could persist in the moon shadow forest for thousands of years. Just as Leon was silently praying that the Agar bull was still alive, a reckless figure knocked on the door of Leon's study. "Is there something wrong, Stein?" Leon raised his head, and there was no emotion in his voice. "My lord Marcus. There's news about the Antolian caravan." Stein replied, panting because he had to trot all the way to report. "Oh." As time went by, the situation in the Principality of Norton became more and more chaotic. On the land west of the Andal Kingdom, Grand Duke Norton, nobles of the Principality, the Kingdom of Walrus, remnants of the Restoration, all kinds of heroes joined together in the Principality of Norton, and the entire Principality had already been in chaos. Although Leon asked Stein to send people to search for the traces of the Antolian caravan, in fact, he had long given up hope. But what he didn't expect was that Stein actually brought back news of the Antolian caravan. "Where are they now?" Stein seemed to hesitate for a moment, then scratched his head, and replied a little embarrassedly, "Just passed through Parma City, and will return to Antolia in about 2 days." "Leon, why did you report it now?" "In fact, the mercenaries of Antolia just found the traces of the caravan from Parma City." Stein's voice was a little uneasy. "This is a letter handed over by the old soldier in charge. The Marcus should read it yourself." Leon opened the letter in his hand with a hint of doubt. Then, he was stunned. The returning veterans wrote down their experiences in the Principality of Norton in brief words. In short, just when they were about to arrive at Bolton, the capital of the Principality of Norton, the civil war in the Principality of Norton broke out. Tens of thousands of noble private soldiers from all over the country gathered under the city of Bolton, and this caravan from Antolia naturally became a piece of fat meat in the eyes of the bandits. Although the members of the caravan were all veterans who retired from the Antolian mercenaries, they were older and there were not many of them. In addition, they were outsiders who were unfamiliar with the place, so running away immediately was the best strategy. It was precisely at this most difficult moment that Elm Ranson stood up. As a veteran who had followed Leon's father to fight north and south, Elm's grasp of the battlefield situation was enough to surpass everyone. Under his leadership, the members of the Antolian caravan had to abandon the goods behind them, and under the pursuit of various bandits, they forced their way across the Chillon River that flowed outside the city of Bolton, and then evacuated all the way north. It was at this time that the Walrus Kingdom, which had been ready for battle, suddenly marched south, forcing the veterans of the Antolian caravan to cross the river again. Since they were back on the other side, Elm led a group of veterans to attack the camp of the nobles of the Principality of Norton under the cover of night. Although there were less than 100 people in the group, they broke through the baggage camp guarded by more than 800 people under the cover of night, allowing the caravan, which had been at the end of its rope, to obtain enough food and grass supplies to continue to rush towards the Andal Kingdom. Then, the remnants of the Restoration Kingdom, which had been silent for many years in the northern continent, suddenly raised the banner of rebellion and blocked the Anatolian caravan's retreat. So, it was a familiar plot again. Elm led his army to the Chillon River again, and actually made a big circle along the border of the Walrus Kingdom. Then, he seized the opportunity to break through the blockade of the Walrus Kingdom from the northwest and return to the Andal Kingdom. What's even more outrageous is that Elm even captured 2 rebel leaders who followed the remnants of the restoration of the country during the battle on the way back. After reading a long description in the letter, Leon couldn't help but remain silent. Talent. Although in Leon's impression, the veteran named Elm was probably over 50 years old, but with such judgment and execution. In short, the description in the letter finally made Leon, who suffered from the shortage of administrative officials, regain a feeling that Anatolia was full of talents. Letting such a person run a business is simply a waste of talent. Even if he was surrounded alone in the Principality of Norton, he was able to return to Anatolia after going through untold hardships. If he is not reused, who else can be reused? This person's name is Elm. Stein quickly replied, because I broke my arm on the battlefield in the northern border, I took the initiative to go to the caravan in Anatolia to take orders. You make arrangements. When they return, I will personally lead the soldiers to greet them outside the city. Since he is a talent, he should be moved to a useful place. What's more, according to the letter, this person not only escaped from the chaos of the Principality of Norton, but also brought back 2 living remnants of the restoration of the country. Leon was naturally full of curiosity about this underground organization that spread throughout the northern continent. After all, if Leon's previous guess was correct, a large amount of the money obtained by Anatolia's infrastructure construction this time might come from here. When Leon thought of this, he felt that a large amount of money was waving at him. As for the current situation in the Principality of Norton, as the situation in this neighboring country becomes increasingly chaotic, Leon has already sensed the approach of war in this brief period of calm. Taking into account readers' feedback that the pace is too slow, this part of the story that does not include the protagonist will be briefly skipped in an effort to quickly transition to Anatolia itself. Chapter 177, When Relatives Are in Trouble, You Remain as Still as a Mountain? The Lord's Castle, the Grand Banquet Hall. In order to entertain the returning veterans, Leon personally roasted a long-legged bird leg, which was limited to early spring, handmade by the Lord, and free for a limited time. To be honest, the long-legged bird leg was really not delicious. Especially for Leon, the woody and astringent meat was even more difficult to swallow, but for the veterans who were not full and slept well these days, it was good enough. You know, long-legged bird legs are only used to entertain nobles. In today's Andal Kingdom, it is in short supply. What we want is not the taste, but the appearance. After swallowing a big piece of meat, Elm raised his head, and his slightly old face showed an expression of loyalty, competence, bravery, humility, good observation, and poor speech. Thank you, Lord Marcus, for your hospitality. Elm's voice was mixed with a hint of excitement. Although he has served the Ximena family for most of his life, to be honest, this is the first time he has been so close to his lord, and even sat at the same table for dinner. What's more, just now, at the gate of Thorn territory, Leon awarded him the title of Elm Knight in front of everyone. This is not an honorary knight, but a real knight who owns a manor. You deserve it. Leon shook his head and said calmly, when we left Anatolia, there were a total of 89 members of the caravan. And under the leadership of you, Elm, 37 people came back alive. If you hadn't acted decisively, I'm afraid even these 37 surviving veterans would have died in the territory of the Principality of Norton. Just for this reason, you deserve such an honor. Hearing this, Elm's body trembled a little, and he stood up tremblingly from the oak bench. I am unworthy of the reward from the Marcus. In order to escape from the Principality of Norton, the Anatolia caravan had to abandon the Moonlight Velvet in the caravan and burn it all, causing the Marcus to suffer losses that he should not have suffered. What's the matter with should or should not? Leon smiled indifferently. The Moonlight Velvet will burn, so will it. You, every soldier who fights for Anatolia, are the wealth that the Ximena family relies on most. As soon as the voice fell, the representatives of the Anatolian military who attended the banquet could not help but be shocked. Todd, Juan, Stein. Whether Leon's statement at this time was to win people's hearts or for something else, they at least heard from Leon's words that Leon valued the Anatolian military. I am willing to be loyal to you. At this moment, the generals of all sizes present stood up in unison, showing their loyalty and attitude to the young lord. Seeing this, Leon nodded with satisfaction and motioned everyone to sit down again. In fact, Leon really didn't feel bad for the moonlight velvet that was burned in the territory of the Principality of Norton. The moonlight velvet is gone, but the moonlight velvet in that convoy made Leon discover a useful talent hidden among the veterans. This deal is a good deal no matter how you look at it. What's more, the burning of the moonlight velvet gave Leon an excuse to raise the price of the moonlight velvet. Regardless of the era, in the absence of macroeconomic regulation and price ceilings, supply is insufficient to meet demand, and prices rise. This is the most basic economic common sense. Tell me about the current situation of the Principality of Norton. Seeing that most of the people present had finished their meals, Leon simply took the opportunity of the gathering of Antolia's capable men to take the initiative to bring up the topic. After all, no matter how extensive the information collected is, it is not as accurate as personal experience. Andrew, who is far away in the abandoned land, reporting to the Marcus, if I use one word to summarize the current situation in the Principality of Norton, it is chaos. Let's not talk about the fact that Grand Duke Norton is trapped in an isolated city. The current Principality of Norton is actually a competition between the remnants of the Restoration, the Kingdom of Walrus and the Norton nobles. And among these three, the most powerful is undoubtedly the Kingdom of Walrus. As the country with the largest land area in the northern continent, even if you look at the entire continent, the cavalry of the Kingdom of Walrus are all first class and powerful. Especially when we invaded, the Principality of Norton was in civil strife. By the time we withdrew from the Principality of Norton, the Kingdom of Walrus had almost controlled all the land on the left bank of the Chillon River. It reaches the Endless Sea in the west and the Kingdom of Andal in the east, and it has the momentum to advance southward. As for the Norton nobles and the remnants of the Restoration, the two parties jointly control the land on the right bank of the Chillon River. Although the original conflict has been temporarily shelved under the attack of the Kingdom of Walrus, the two sides are incompatible after all, and there are news from time to time that the remnants of the restoration of the country have killed the nobles. However, when we were returning, we heard that Princess Kezia, the daughter of Grand Duke Norton, had arrived in the capital, probably wanting to ask for help from the Andal Kingdom. Elm finished what he saw and heard along the way, and then looked at his young lord who had already fallen into deep thought. According to Leon's judgment, even if Wilbert I, who had just experienced the war, did not want to start a war again, facing the chaos of the Principality of Norton, the Andal Kingdom might not be able to stay out of it. After all, whether it is the Kingdom of Walrus or the remnants of the restoration of the country who are hiding in the dark on weekdays, these people have always been the worries of the Andal Kingdom and its neighbors. And now, the two worries have collided again. Even if we don't consider that Wilbert I's father is the brother-in-law of the Duke of Norton, the Andal Kingdom can't sit idly by. Moreover, strictly speaking, the Norton Princess Kezia Brandon who came to the Andal Kingdom for help can actually be regarded as the niece of Wilbert I. When relatives are in trouble, you can't just stand still, right? If so, I'm afraid that the prestige that Wilbert I has accumulated in the Civil War will also disappear. Therefore, although the Andal Kingdom is still in peace today, it is actually on the brink of war. But does the Andal Kingdom really have the confidence to start a war? Leon doesn't think so anyway. The Andal Kingdom, which has just experienced a civil war, is also riddled with holes, and the north and east have long been beaten. If another war is fought in the west of the kingdom, then whether it wins or loses, the Andal Kingdom will probably pay a very heavy price. So, Leon is actually quite curious, facing the current dilemma, what decision will Wilbert I make? Chapter 178 Antolia's Steam Engine 20th Edition. Actually, not to mention that Leon didn't know, even Wilbert I himself was a little confused at this time. There was no way. As a young monarch, he had just ascended the throne for less than a year. And in this year, the war for the throne of the Andal Kingdom broke out first. He finally quelled the rebellion with the loyalty of loyal ministers and generals. Now the Duchy of Norton to the west of the Andal Kingdom is in trouble again. If it was just a rebellion by the nobles, it would be fine. Anyway, driven by interests, the relationship between the Duchy of Norton and the Andal Kingdom would not change because of the replacement of Grand Duke Norton. But now, the Kingdom of Walrus is marching south. If those pagans swallow the Duchy of Norton in one bite, then the northern border defense line that the Andal Kingdom has worked hard to build will be gone. The defenseless western part of the kingdom will also face the threat of the Kingdom of Walrus. And this is a threat that no king can accept. Therefore, even if the Norton Princess Kezia Brando could not come, Wilbert I would not remain indifferent. But the problem is, the Andal Kingdom today can be said to be willing to support, but it is somewhat helpless. The reason is simple, it can no longer afford to fight. The most serious consequence of the civil war in the kingdom is not the shortage of troops, but the lack of food. The previous civil war destroyed the farming of that year. The ministers of the Imperial Conference finally managed to survive the winter food crisis through various twists and turns. If they were to go to war directly with the Walrus Kingdom, the food supply of the Andal Kingdom would inevitably fall into a state of shortage again. What should we do? Let's talk about it. Essex, Malacan Palace. At the emergency Imperial Conference, Wilbert I, the Andal Kingdom, said a little dully. I think it is not easy to go to war with the Walrus Kingdom right now. But we cannot ignore those Walrus cavalry heading south, so we can try to provide financial and other assistance to the Duchy of Norton. The new finance minister, Count Brabant, looked around and saw that all the nobles present kept silent, so he took the initiative to speak. Aid? Wilbert I's tone was a little helpless. Several royal meetings have been held before, and the conclusion each time was to provide aid, but the question is who to provide aid to. In theory, the one who should be assisted the most is naturally Grand Duke Norton. But how many troops does my cousin have at this time? The only thing he can do is to be trapped in Bolton City. Even if he is given aid, it is a problem whether the aid can be sent in. What's more, the cause of this incident is the rebellion of the nobles. The nobles of the Duchy of Norton will definitely not let us send aid over. If Grand Duke Norton is forced to abdicate after this battle, then wouldn't this aid be wasted? Seeing this, Count Brabant simply closed his mouth like the nobles beside him, silently raised his buttocks, and leaned back on the chair behind him. Sure enough, it's more comfortable to fish. Your Majesty. In the end, it was the mature and prudent military minister Eubal Heron who spoke up. Instead of considering these things, it is better to ask for help from the countries in the southern continent first. The pagans in the Kingdom of Walrus are the public enemy of all countries. By doing this, we can show Princess Keshia that we will not sit idly by. As for the second point, it is not the Andal Kingdom's only business to counter the Kingdom of Walrus. If even the countries in the southern continent sit idly by, then even if the war in Norton is not going well, your reputation will not be affected. In addition, I hope you can send special envoys to communicate with the Kingdom of Walrus and mediate as an intermediary country. The bottom line of the Andal Kingdom is that the Walrus people cannot cross the Chillon River. If the group of pagans in the north stop here, although the northern border of the Principality of Norton will be completely occupied, it will not threaten the security of the western part of the kingdom. After all, relying solely on the Andal Kingdom, which has just experienced war, I am afraid it cannot afford the consequences of a full-scale war. So even if a war is started, it must not be started directly in the name of the kingdom. Hearing this, Wilbert I could not help but sigh. Let's do it. Not only should we send the request for help to the southern countries, but also to the Pope. The Kingdom of Walrus is a pagan. If the Church does not help, it is really wrong. Leon, who was far away in Anatolia, was naturally not very clear about the confrontation at the Imperial Conference. Even though Leon and the Count of Brabant had a good personal relationship and would exchange letters from time to time, it was impossible for him to know everything that happened in Essex. With the end of the banquet, Elm, who had just been canonized as a knight, was appointed by Leon as the military advisor of Anatolia. As Todd's deputy, he participated in the training and deployment of Antolia's military forces. As for the two believers of the Restoration relics he captured, although Leon had a great interest in the Restoration relics, it was obviously not the time for him to personally interrogate them. Today, these two believers are just prisoners under the Ximena family. Only after he feels the fear from the bottom of his heart, loses his dignity, and has the idea that the information he knows is of no value to the Antolians, Leon can obtain the most useful information in the shortest time. So, torture first. Lock him up in the dungeon for 10 days or half a month. And compared to those remnants of the Restoration who are more or less missing a string in their brains, the steam engine of Anatolia is the thing that can most arouse Leon's interest. Just this morning, Hillman, who led the research on nightmare fuel, has sent Leon the news of the second generation of Antolia's steam engine. If it weren't for holding a grand reception banquet for the Antolian veterans who have experienced hardships, Leon would have been unable to suppress the impulse deep in his heart. What's more, the results this time are not just steam engines. According to Hillman, the crossbow arrows mentioned by Leon earlier have also made a breakthrough, which can be said to be a double-edged sword, a two-pronged approach. This time, when Hillman excitedly helped the lord who had come from afar off his horse, the usually taciturn dwarf craftsman showed a hint of obvious excitement on his face. "My lord Marcus. This time, please rest assured. After using nightmare fuel as the fuel for the steam engine, Antolia's second-generation steam engine will definitely not be as useless as before." Chapter 179 Leon sees the dawn of steam civilization. When these words came out of Hillman's mouth, Leon actually believed them from the bottom of his heart. Although dwarves are always boastful, Hillman has always been an outlier among dwarves. As a dwarf craftsman, Hillman is not only not good at speaking, but he has never been involved in the most common bad habit of alcoholism among dwarves. And it is such a dwarf who can still boast so much even though he knows that the first generation of steam engines has disappointed Leon. This naturally makes Leon have more yearning and fantasy for the second generation of steam engines in Antolia. "Nightmare fuel is the best fuel I have ever seen." Even in the process of leading Leon, Hillman couldn't help but explain it to his own Marcus in person. But, compared with Sherman's endless nonsense and assurances, Hillman's words can be said to be pearls, and every word touched Leon's heart. "It only takes a piece of nightmare fuel this big." Hillman gestured with his hands. "The heat released when it burns is probably enough to replace countless coals. It is completely different from the previous thing that uses campfires to heat and produce steam." As he spoke, a huge steel machine appeared in front of Leon. It was very different from the first generation of steam engines that were so simple and horrifying. Although the steam engine in front of him was also ugly, it was ugly in attitude, ugly in pattern, and even ugly in a different kind of beauty. This machine made entirely of steel was like a muscular man. The rough lines seemed to contain infinite power, making it difficult for people to look away. "Ignite." Hillman certainly noticed the expression of his lord, and quickly gave an order to the craftsman beside him happily. In a moment, a rumbling sound of gas expansion came from inside the machine. The connecting rod connected to the steam engine finally trembled slightly amidst the dull sounds. Then, under the action of the second-generation steam engine of Antolia, several external connecting rods began to twitch gradually, and amidst the sound of gear collision, the external circular wheel connected to the connecting rod necklace also began to slowly rotate. At the same time, the chimney at the top of the iron lump in front of him finally emitted a wisp of eye-catching white smoke. "Mr. Marcus. It's done." Hillman's voice was mixed with a little tremor, and his eyes were full of expectation. "Is this the steam engine you mentioned?" "Of course." Until this moment, Leon finally breathed a sigh of relief. "This is the steam engine. Antolia's indispensable source of power in the future. You did a good job." "Very good." Since Antolia's first-generation steam engine was actually just a simple steam ball improved from another world, Leon's psychological expectations were very low before meeting Hillman. As long as the effect is better than the last time, it will be a gratifying progress. But what Leon didn't expect was that the dwarf craftsman in front of him actually presented a steam engine that was ugly but fully functional. "Do you know what Pingdu Town Lu Dabo is?" Leon looked at Hillman beside him and suddenly asked a very abrupt question. "Huh? Then do you know which country's flag is the pure white flag? Doesn't that mean surrender?" Hillman asked in confusion. He suddenly became a little worried. Could it be that his Lord Marcus was so happy about this thing in front of him that he was stupid? "It's okay." Leon shook his head. He felt that although Hillman could rub the steam engine by hand, he should not be a time traveler like himself, and his worries were probably redundant. "But..." Leon frowned and asked hesitantly, "Although the essence of a steam engine is just to boil water, the difficulty lies in how to ensure airtightness. How did you overcome this difficulty?" Airtightness. Even though Hillman had never understood such professional terms before, as one of the most outstanding dwarf craftsmen in Antolia, he quickly understood what Leon meant. "It's very simple." Hillman answered as a matter of course. "Simple. The airtightness between the cylinder and the piston is the top priority for achieving heat-energy conversion." Even Leon, a time traveler, did not think it was a simple matter. "Yes. Wherever there is a leak, just plug it. Although the operation is a bit complicated and it takes a long time to make it by hand, it is actually not too difficult." Hillman never kept his lords in suspense, and answered immediately. "Wherever there is a leak, plug it." Hillman's answer was very straightforward. But it also made Leon realize that he was a little too picky. Even though it was impossible to build a qualified cylinder directly, if it was done according to Hillman's idea, Although there might be some minor flaws in the efficiency of the use of the power, it could still be used. For Anatolia today, it was fine as long as it could be used. After a brief moment of shock, Leon immediately drew out the sword in his hand and shouted, "Hillman! Here!" Seeing this, the dwarf in front of him seemed to finally realize something, and quickly knelt on one knee, suppressing the excitement in his heart, waiting for Leon's next words. Just as he expected, Leon was probably going to give him a canonization ceremony. Although Hillman was usually taciturn and looked like he had no desires, it was impossible to say that he was not envious of the title of nobility. His younger brother Sherman was already an honorary knight. As the elder brother, Hillman was just an ordinary civilian craftsman. The reason why he put so much effort into the development of the steam engine was to prove that his talent and skills were no less than his brother's. To be honest, the fact that the second-generation steam engine could be successfully completed in such a short time was actually related to the atmosphere of involution that Leon had inadvertently created between the two brothers. After Leon finished reciting a long and lengthy canonization speech, the young Marcus stepped forward and personally helped Hillman, who was kneeling on one knee, up. "Honorary Baron Hillman." Leon smiled and said, "As the inventor of the Hillman steam engine, this is the honor you deserve." Without much hesitation, Leon gave the second-generation steam engine of Anatolia in front of him another name, the Hillman steam engine. For Leon, this was just a matter of convenience. But for many craftsmen in Anatolia, this is undoubtedly a benchmark that they are thinking about and working hard for. Chapter 180, Scope Steam Cannon. Naming a newly born machine after oneself is a great honor no matter in which era. Moreover, according to the nature of the nobles in this world, it is actually the most common operation of the noble lords to attribute a machinery developed by the craftsmen to themselves. And like Leon, the nobles who are not only willing to justify the names of the craftsmen, but also willing to grant them titles. Not to mention that there are only a handful of them, they can basically be said to be unique. So, when Hillman's canonization ceremony ended, the most excited people were not the dwarf who was canonized as an honorary baron, but the craftsmen who happened to be watching the ceremony. The head craftsmen who lived together on weekdays suddenly became the honorary baron of Anatolia. This drastic change undoubtedly brought a huge impact to the hearts of the craftsmen. Leon looked around, and he could even easily see an emotion similar to "if it were me, I could do it too" on the faces of the craftsmen. And he wanted this kind of involution atmosphere. Anatolia may lack administrative talents, but Anatolia has countless craftsmen. This is naturally due to Leon's talent introduction plan. On the one hand, he promised enough benefits to the craftsmen who were willing to work for the Ximena family, and on the other hand, he took advantage of the interval between the civil war to pack up all the craftsmen in the south of the kingdom. You know, just last year, in the city of Parma alone, the Anatolians packed up hundreds of experienced craftsmen. If you work hard for the Ximena family, you will naturally get benefits. If you can really forge a machine like a steam engine, even a noble title is not an impossible thing. In front of many craftsmen present, Leon made his promise without hesitation. And as the cheers around him rang, Leon finally turned his attention back to the new honorary baron of Anatolia, the dwarf craftsman Hillman. Although the research and development of the steam engine has made a major breakthrough, it is only the first step. How to apply it in practice and bring enough benefits to Anatolia is what the Ximena family is most concerned about. You are the creator of this steam engine, so the application of the steam engine will be left to you. May I ask, Lord Marcus, where do you plan to use this steam engine first? Although the steam engine has been developed, to be honest, it is still a long way from its actual application. Since the concept of the steam engine was first proposed by Leon, and Leon is the only one with decision-making power, then listening to Leon's opinion will undoubtedly help Hillman avoid many detours. Transportation. The miners in the Southwest Highlands certainly have tall-legged strange birds as labor, but when transporting mineral deposits, they also need manpower to do it. Upon hearing this, Hillman nodded immediately. "I understand." As Leon continued to look up and down at the iron lump in front of him with curiosity, Hillman waved his hand gently, and a young craftsman walked out of the crowd. He held a large tray covered with black cloth in his hand, and came to Leon carefully. "This is..." Leon's eyes stayed on the tray in the young man's hand for a moment, and he couldn't help but cast a slightly hesitant look at Hillman. "This is the repeating crossbow you mentioned earlier." Hillman took the initiative to explain. "Since you mentioned this matter in front of the craftsman that day, Scopo has always kept your words in mind. Look, After only a few months, he has already made achievements. Even the mechanical quiver you brought to the abandoned land before, Scoop, who also participated a lot. Scoop. Leon couldn't help but look at the young craftsman in front of him, who was a little shy, flustered, nervous, and trembling all over. That's me. Scoop took a deep breath and said with courage, "You said before that the semi-automatic arrow launcher we designed has no practical significance, and I agree with you. But then you mentioned the steam cannon and the repeating crossbow that does not require a steam device. With my current ability, I can't make a steam cannon, so I just thought about the repeating crossbow you mentioned." Hearing this, Leon lifted the black cloth covering the tray. At this moment, a weapon that looked a little bulky gradually overlapped with a crossbow in Leon's impression. The crossbow was 1 meter long, and the crossbow arm was about 60 centimeters long. There was an inverted wooden box above the crossbow arm, which was probably used to store arrows. Although the repeating crossbow in front of him was a little bulky compared to the modern crossbow when Leon traveled through, as a prototype of the first generation of repeating crossbows, Leon was quite satisfied with it. How far can it shoot? The effective range is less than 100 meters. Scoop answered truthfully, the material of the crossbow is the black pine wood from the eastern part of the Thorn territory. If it is replaced with better wood, the range may reach about 150 meters. Enough. Leon nodded with satisfaction. Although compared with the range of bows and arrows, the range of crossbows is obviously much shorter. But this is the first attempt of the Antolians after all, not to mention that it can be fired continuously. Thinking of this, Leon simply ordered someone to drag the target, and then let the guards who followed him test it personally. It's not that Leon didn't want to do it himself, but mainly because his accuracy had long been tested in actual combat, slightly inferior to those experienced archers. Or to put it more directly, basically he can shoot, but he doesn't know where he will shoot, so he naturally won't take the initiative to reveal his shortcomings in front of everyone. Bang! As the test soldier pulled the trigger, the sharp crossbow arrow broke through the air and pierced the target not far away in a flash. Mike. Seeing this, Leon couldn't help but applaud. Now that we have nightmare fuel and the birth of the steam engine, I want to try the possibility of steam cannon. Seeing that his own Marcus seemed quite satisfied with his work, Scoop couldn't help but ask boldly. Steam cannon. In fact, Leon just said it casually that day. Before he crossed over, although steam cannons had been made by people, they were eventually eliminated by the times due to various problems, and there were almost no reliable records. But this is Antolia. This is a different world. The steam engine is no longer driven by coal, but nightmare fuel from the black fog, so the steam cannon Scoop mentioned may not be a fantasy. Thinking of this, Leon finally made up his mind. Build it. The steam cannon is left to you. Not only to build the steam cannon, but also to improve the repeating crossbow in front of you, not only to make it small enough, but also to increase the range as much as possible. If you can really build it, you will also be the honorary Baron of Antolia. If you want people to work hard, you must first paint a rosy picture. Since Scoop took the initiative to ask for it, Leon naturally chose to agree. You know, the Principality of Norton, which is now in the midst of war, is only separated from Antolia by a group of mountains. Since the Antolians can cross the continuous mountains in the south and set foot on the land of the abandoned land, then the Antolians may also be able to cross the ridge in the east and look at the territory of the Principality of Norton. Chapter 181. Leon is confused by the fragrance. Early in the morning, the soft warm sun quietly sneaked into a corner of the castle, baking the originally cold corner warm. A new day has arrived in Antolia. Outside the Thorn territory, the hard-working people have started a new day of farming. They waved their hoes and sowed seeds for a good harvest in the vast fields. In the Lord's castle of the Ximena family, Leon also began to enjoy his breakfast. The long oak table in the grand banquet hall was filled with sumptuous dishes, even making the originally empty long table look a little crowded. As the Lord of Antolia, Leon has never promoted any frugality in this land. As a noble, you must have a noble face. But face does not mean waste. For example, all kinds of pickled jerky, which are taken from the front leg meat of Highland hounds, taste very bad, and Leon will not eat them. But because that thing has almost no shelf life and can be easily made into a lot of dishes, the chefs in the Lord's kitchen will almost always put it on the table for 3 meals a day, no matter morning or evening. In this way, Even if a noble who is seriously ill suddenly chooses to visit in the morning, it will never damage the appearance of the Marquis of Antolia. Compared with the various cold dishes placed on the long table, León is very satisfied with the breakfast he selected. The chefs of the castle have fully understood the taste and preferences of their lords in these days of running in. So, under León's guidance, they cut a marinated beef into many small pieces, and then split a slit in the baked white bread. Put some green vegetables in it, and then fill it with beef mince. An Antolian version of raugiamo, or a sandwich, was born. In addition, for the sake of nutritional balance, the chef of the castle also added some boiled bird eggs that were also chopped into small pieces, and some simple seasonings such as salt and pepper. With one bite, the freshly baked bread still has a hint of wheat fragrance, and the fat and lean beef melts on the tip of the tongue almost the moment it enters the mouth, mixing the slightly greasy and fragrant meat flavor with the dense bread. This extremely layered taste is quite popular with León. And León's breakfast is not just that. Under his tireless teachings these days, the chefs of Antolia finally got the hang of it. After a series of steps that are not complicated, but simple but could not be thought of before, the soybeans grown by the people were actually made into simple tofu pudding. Sprinkle some salt, and then mix some local seasonings of Antolia into it, and a bowl of Antolia's version of salty tofu pudding is ready. A big mouthful of beef with bread, and a spoonful of salty and delicious tofu pudding. Hiss. León was so confused by the aroma. Don't wait for the improved repeating crossbows. After swallowing the beef with a strong meaty aroma in his mouth, León raised his head and said to Todd, who was standing not far away waiting for orders, although the new generation of crossbows will definitely be better than the current ones, it will take time after all. The improved ones will definitely be more useful than the ones before the improvements, but if we just wait, there will be improved versions after the improved versions. Then when will the Antolian army be equipped with those new crossbows? As for the steam cannon, no one can say whether that thing is useful or not. Besides, it is unknown how long it will take for Scoop to figure it out. Let people put the first generation of repeating crossbows into production and equip them to the Antolian militia. Which army do you plan to equip them to first? Todd asked cautiously. This is the real purpose of his coming here today. Antolian mercenaries, Antolian militia, Lapric legion. Although the three main forces all belong to León, they still scramble for them after hearing the news of the new weapons. León shook his head and did not answer Todd's question, but asked, when can the garrison militias in various places be trained? With the increase in the population of Antolia and the expansion of land, recruiting new soldiers has naturally become a pressing matter at the moment. Especially when the Andal Kingdom may be involved in war at any time and the situation of the abandoned land is still unclear, it is naturally urgent to further strengthen the military strength of Antolia. In León's conception, although the three main legions of Antolia are not yet fully staffed, this is not the time to pursue full staffing. He hopes that the three main forces in his hands can be transformed into the Spear of Antolia as soon as possible, which can be fully deployed in the face of war. Then 3 new garrison troops will be formed on this land, Southwest Highlands, Thorn Territory and Baragori. These 3 garrison troops are completely committed to the defense mission as their first goal. On weekdays, they farm to support the war, and when necessary, they can also provide sufficient soldiers to supplement the 3 main forces. In his eyes, this is a necessary means to regularize and standardize the reserve army of Antolia. After all, although Antolia also has a reserve army at present, due to historical issues and León's previous negligence, the recruitment and training of reserve soldiers are actually mainly controlled by local officials. This is undoubtedly contrary to the policy of the Ximena family to fully lead the military forces of Antolia. It only takes a week. Todd said with certainty. Antolia already has enough reserve soldiers in various parts of the country, but it may take some time to reorganize and adjust the troops. According to your instructions, the number of garrison troops in the Thorn Territory, Southwest Highlands, and Baragori Pass is initially planned to be 400, 600, and 1,000. The Thorn Territory has the least number of garrisons. This is naturally because this land is the garrison of several major Antolia corps, and there are many noble vassals in the north as a barrier, so it will not face threats in a short time. The number of people in the Southwest Highlands is the second largest, on the one hand because of the existence of the tall-legged monster bird, and on the other hand because the Southwest Highlands are located between the Thorn Territory and the abandoned land. No matter which side faces a threat, support can be provided as soon as possible. As for Baragori, the reason is simple. Although it is called the Baragori Garrison Corps, it actually shoulders the heavy burden of guarding Fort Wilson and the Baragori Pass. Expanding territory, guarding against monsters. Both aspects require manpower, so naturally the largest number of troops must be equipped. Well done. After the Baragori Garrison Corps stationed in the abandoned land is in place, transfer the Laprik people back to the Thorn territory first. They have made great contributions this time, so naturally the Laprik Corps should be given priority in changing their equipment. A transition chapter, a new plot is coming soon. The map is almost finished, and I still have to adjust some details. I will post it in the next few days. Chapter 182, The Elves Feel the Human Shock. P.S. The Elves Felt the Shock of Billions of Humans, Part 1, is Chapter 165. Leon likes salty tofu pudding. But Elt prefers sweet. Compared with Leon's hodgepodge of seasonings, Elt usually chooses to add juicy wild berries to it, and squeezes it hard with a spoon when eating, so that the overflowing sweet juice will blend with the broken tofu pudding. Although in Leon's eyes, this is a real dark dish. But there is no way the moon elves like this. If you count from the time Elt left the abandoned land, he has been in Anatolia for more than a month. As an emissary of the elves, during his time living in Anatolia, Elt has always enjoyed the treatment of a viscount. Of course, there are some discomforts. After all, this place is not like the Moon Shadow Forest, where you can pick juicy berries with your hands, but it is also not like the abandoned land, where you need to hold a torch in your hand for daily travel. Between the black fog dissipating and wild berries, Elt will of course choose the former. Even though Leon thought that Anatolia was still very backward, and the so-called CBD of Thorn territory was at most a rural market in the previous life, in Elt's eyes, it was undoubtedly a prosperous place. It was also during his life here that Elt first realized the tip of the iceberg of this huge human world and saw a wider world. Northern continent, Andal Kingdom, Anatolia Marquisate. He could not imagine the civilization created by humans on this land, and it was even more difficult to imagine the huge gap between elves and humans. So during the days in Anatolia, Elt had been observing everything that happened on this land. The Anatolians used Grum's mucus to mix magical cement, and used cement to pave endless roads. The Anatolians built a shocking city with their own hands, and built a towering church on the west bank of the White Blade River. There are a large number of people living on this land, and human workshops stand on this land. As Elt learned more, he realized more and more clearly that in fact, the Antorians were already invincible at the beginning of their contact with the elves. But since contact with humans was inevitable, Elt quickly adjusted his mentality. He decided to observe everything that happened on this land with a learning mentality. If the Moon Elves could put aside their pride and cross the river with the help of the Antorians, the Moon Elves, who also have a brilliant history, would be able to create a brilliant civilization, right? However, when he saw the World Tree seedling planted on the land of Antoria under the leadership of the humble and cautious Antorians, Elt felt bad. To be precise, he was broken. If everything that Antoria presented to Elt before this only made him feel shocked, then this World Tree seedling planted in the eastern woodland made him feel a little scared. That's right, it was fear. It's not that the World Tree was not well taken care of by the Antorians, but that the Antorians took too good care of the World Tree. Whether it is the Moon Elves or other elf tribes, the elves have always claimed to be the guardians of the World Tree. Including Elt, every Moon Elf can tell the growth process of the World Tree and even the World Tree seedlings. However, what did Elt see on this land belonging to the Antillians? He saw a World Tree seedling that was more than 3 meters tall. And it was lush and full of vitality. This was completely beyond Elt's cognition. Because when Elt planted this seedling on the land of the abandoned land, its height was only 1 meter. Even though the World Tree seedlings have been growing very fast, if calculated according to the normal growth rate, the height today will never exceed 2 meters, at most it will be a little more than 1.5 meters. But now, just over a month later, the World Tree has thrived on the land of Anatolia, and it is even stronger than when it was protected by the elves. When it sensed the arrival of humans, the leaves of the World Tree began to shake vigorously, and a faint light flowed on the tender green leaves, as if conveying its inner joy to the visitor. For a moment, the alarm bells in Elt's heart rang loudly. If you want to use a picture to describe Elt's state of mind at this time, it can be roughly described as: a pilgrim from Rome saw a magnificent temple of Saint Sophia when he arrived in Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. The above is Elt's mood when he saw the seedling of the World Tree. How could this be? Elt couldn't help but mutter to himself, how could this be? If the world tree will grow faster and better in the hands of the Antorians, then, who is the guardian of the world tree? Isn't this title that the elves have always been proud of a joke? It must be because of the black fog. It must be the black fog that shrouds the abandoned land that inhibits the growth of the world tree. He wants to write a letter. The transaction of the shadow manipulator must not be delayed any longer. Almost the next second after seeing the world tree seedling, Elt made the decision without hesitation. Although he also knew that he would be blackmailed by the Antolians if he asked for the shadow manipulator at this time. But there was no way. For the face of the Moon Elves and the title of the Guardian of the World Tree, the Moon Elves had no choice. At this moment, the Antolian waiters who were responsible for receiving Elt looked at each other. Even though they were behind Elt, they had already felt an emotion from the Moon Elves' messenger that they had never felt before. That was the surging and excitement that only the great enemy could emit. Moon Shadow Forest. At this moment, although Elt's letter had not yet been delivered, the Elf Queen Alicia had already fallen into deep autism. As the only one of the Moon Elves who was qualified to talk directly with the World Tree, she was particularly concerned about every word of the World Tree. However, just now, the words of the World Tree caught her off guard for a while. He said. He felt a surge of vitality in the seedling planted in the north. The World Tree hopes that the Moon Elves can continue to work hard and plant new World Tree seedlings in the land in the north, so that the glory of the God of Nature can cover the vast land. North. To the north of the Moon Shadow Forest are continuous mountains, and to the north of the mountains, there is the territory of humans. Thanks to the Buck Friends' legendary Big Fat Sheep A and Slikang for their rewards, Master Lai will award each of them a World Tree seedling as a reward. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183 Who is the Guardian of the World Tree? The morning breeze in the abandoned land was a little dry. The morning breeze blowing on this land would make people feel a little upset, not to mention that Alicia was not in a calm mood at this time. Go away. Alicia raised her foot. She chased the baby rabbit that was blocking her and crying to a corner of the room. The human had a seedling of the World Tree in his hand. Alicia was very clear about this. And as the Queen of the Elves, she also knew the origin of that World Tree. It was a seedling planted by the Moon Elves around the Moon Shadow Forest, and the humans, those outsiders who suddenly appeared in the Elves' vision, took one of them away. If it were in the past, Alicia might not care too much. But now, the sound transmission of the World Tree seemed to hide her head with a stick, knocking her head a little buzzing. In the legend of the Elves, the first World Tree was planted on this land by the God of Nature himself. Therefore, this ancient tree, whose existence is closely connected with the gods, has a meaning that no other creation has ever had. Even thousands of years ago, the World Tree has always been the symbol of the Elves, using its lush greenery and vitality to protect countless elves living on this land. But now, the elf status as the guardian of the World Tree is being challenged by humans. The north of the mountains is obviously the territory of the Antolians. Although separated by the continuous mountains, Alicia does not know what Antolian has done to the seedlings of the World Tree, but the perception of the World Tree will never be wrong. There is no doubt that humans have taken good care of the seedlings of the World Tree. But looking at the Moon Elves, under the cover of the black fog, every World Tree seedling growing on this land looks sickly. Fortunately, the World Tree does not seem to know that the seedling in the north was planted by humans, which makes it possible for everything in the future to turn around. It is necessary to reach a deal with humans before the elves plant trees next time. Otherwise, Alicia will not be able to answer the question of the World Tree. And then, a letter sent from Antolia by the elf messenger Elt Shovel further confirmed Alicia's thoughts. In the letter, Elt not only explained the situation of the World Tree seedlings, but also told Alicia everything he saw in Antolia. Go to Wilsonburg. After finally calming down her mind, Alicia said to the elf guards outside the door, I want to visit those humans from the north again. She certainly knew that at this moment, the young lord had already returned to his homeland north of the mountains. Even if she went to Wilsonburg this time, she might be disappointed. But now she has already made up her mind. If Leon is not in Wilsonburg, then she will go to Antolia in person to visit. Even if it is a dragon's den and a tiger's lair, it is worth it. Alicia has always had a very clear self-positioning: the world tree can lose the elves, but the elves must not lose the world tree. Jorni is writing a book. As the ambassador of Antolia to Moon Shadow Forest, Jorni's life is actually a bit boring compared to Eltschak in Antolia. Although it sounds like a good job. When he just arrived at Moon Shadow Forest, Jorni was also very excited. But in fact, when he really lived in Moon Shadow Forest, he finally found out the legendary stories that the paladin and the elf queen have to tell and other things are all fake. The elves are really boring. Due to the surrounding black fog, the range of activities of the elves has always been confined to this land called Moon Shadow Forest. Even if the area alone is not smaller than Antolia before León took over, you can see dense forests everywhere, and there are all kinds of traps set up by the moon elves in the deep forest. For the sake of his own life, the only place where he can really move around is actually the camp of the moon elves. The world tree hundreds of meters high, the eternal fire that never goes out. As a famous attraction in the moon elf camp, although it will be impressive at first glance, but he can't not stare at the eternal fire every day, right? So, in addition to serving as a human envoy, in order to kill boring time, Johnny simply picked up his previous hobbies. In short, writing books. There is a tree called Changyuking growing in the Moon Shadow Forest. Its broad leaves can be used as excellent paper, which is roughly equivalent to the status of craft paper in human society. So, in boredom, Johnny began his own creation Moon Elf Observation Notes, 2 or 3 things between me and the elves. Compared with the books that Johnny had previously come into contact with, which contained various exaggerated words and liu-bei paragraphs, what Johnny wrote this time were all his most real experiences in the Moon Shadow Forest. This is not because he decided to break off with his former self. The main reason was that he was the envoy of Antolia after all, and he was in the territory of the Moon Elves. If he did something from the book, it would at least cause a diplomatic incident that would surprise his friends. And today, just as he was feeling the fragrance of the grass and trees outside the window, his thoughts were flowing. The maid of the Elf Queen Alicia made a request to him from the Elf Queen. Alicia was going to visit Fort Wilson. And out of consideration for the face of the elves, she needed Johnny to write an invitation letter for Alicia on behalf of Antolia. In this way, Alicia's visit could be regarded as coming by invitation. Almost at the moment of hearing this request, Leon's previous instructions entered Johnny's mind. When Elt's letter was delivered to Alicia, Johnny, the envoy of Antolia, also received a letter from Antolia. Elt Shovel, the elf envoy in Antolia, was observing everything that happened in Antolia. But wasn't Johnny, who was in the Moon Shadow Forest, watching the elves' every move? The spread of black fog and the withered yellow leaves of the world tree made almost all the elves living on this land feel depressed. And now, the opportunity to blackmail has finally come. Compared with the Antolians' active sales, some words are more credible when spoken by the elves. So, Alicia's trip must be for the Shadow Manipulator. Almost in just a moment, Johnny had already anticipated Alicia's mood from his mind. Antolian planted the seedlings of the World Tree, and Fort Wilson, located in the abandoned land, was a new city built with the World Tree as the center. Presumably, when the young elven queen saw the World Tree, which had original yellowed branches and leaves, regained its vitality, she should agree to the price offered by the Antolians, right? I have already written the invitation. Johnny smiled and handed a letter that had already been sealed with wax to the elf maid. Antorians will always be good friends and partners of the Moon Elves. Win-win cooperation and common progress have always been the pursuit of Lord León Ximena, the Marquess of Antolia. Johnny straightened his collar, cleared his throat, and said sincerely. Chapter 184 Things have changed in the Principality of Norton. In the spring of 1053, Bolton, the capital of the Duchy of Norton, was captured by the Walrus Army, and the Grand Duke of Norton, Sanger Brandon, committed suicide. In the autumn of 1058, the Andal Kingdom disintegrated. Based on the above materials, please explain, why did the Andal Kingdom actually perish in 1053? Selected from Classic Test Questions on Imperial History, II edition, published by the Antolia Higher School of Magic Press. For the nobles of the northern continent, the fall of Bolton was undoubtedly a blow to the head. This not only marked the complete collapse of the legitimate regime of the Duchy of Norton represented by Grand Duke Sanger Brandon of Norton, but also meant that the efforts of the Andal Kingdom to resolve the conflict in the Duchy of Norton through diplomatic mediation had completely failed. The army of the Kingdom of Walrus crossed the Kyron River and headed south 7 days ago. After capturing Bolton City, the army split into 3 groups, with the intention of capturing the Principality of Norton in one fell swoop. Now it seems that the contact between the Kingdom of Walrus and the Andal envoys is just a stopgap measure. Controlling the entire territory of the Principality of Norton and cutting off the land connection between the Kingdom of Andal, the Principality of Norton and the Kingdom of Idrid is probably their most real goal. And the most crucial thing is, those damned believers of the Restoration relics may have reached an agreement with the pagans and suddenly launched an attack. The southern part of the Principality of Norton has fallen into chaos. At the imperial meeting in the Malacan Palace, the Minister of Military Affairs, Eubal Harlan, was worriedly telling Wilbert about the current war situation. Forcing the Kyron River to head south was a result that Wilbert could not accept in any way. The chaos caused by the Restoration relics was completely beyond everyone's expectations. Because this will inevitably lead to the defenseless territory in the west of the kingdom being exposed to the pagans of the Walrus Kingdom, making the northern border defense line built by the Andal kings at a huge cost completely lose its due role. As 3 brothers in distress facing the pagans of the Walrus Kingdom, the Andal Kingdom, Idrid Kingdom and the Principality of Norton, located in the northwest corner of the continent, have always been at the forefront of the confrontation with the Walrus Kingdom. The Andal Kingdom has a northern border defense line built at a huge cost, and the Idrid Kingdom has a steep terrain as a barrier. Therefore, the Principality of Norton, which is sandwiched between the 2 kingdoms and has a flat terrain, naturally becomes the most vulnerable link among the 3 kingdoms. Once the Walrus people really swallow up the territory of the Principality of Norton, the strategic situation of the northern continent will inevitably change significantly. Not only will the Idrid Kingdom, located in the far west, be surrounded by the damn pagans, but even the Andal Kingdom will face unprecedented national defense pressure. We must not let the Walrus people succeed in their plan, Wilbert said firmly. At this moment, he was actually facing a dilemma. If he sent troops directly into the Principality of Norton, the comprehensive strength of the Andal Kingdom would inevitably be severely weakened, and even whether it could keep the second place in the comprehensive national strength of the northern continent would be a problem. But if he just watched the fire from the other side and allowed the Walrus people to occupy the Principality of Norton, what awaited the Andal Kingdom would be a slow death. If the comprehensive strength of the countries in the northern continent was ranked, the first place was the Adelaide Kingdom located in the northeast of the Andal Kingdom, followed by the Andal Kingdom, and the Idrid Kingdom ranked 3rd. As for the Walrus Kingdom, although the strength of the Walrus Kingdom should be ranked at the top in any aspect, because the Walrus people were all pagans. This country with the largest territory in the northern continent had long been expelled from the mainland by all countries. The Adelaide Kingdom was definitely not to be counted on. Although this equally large country was not ruled by pagans, it had always been in love with the Walrus Kingdom, scolding it verbally but kissing it behind its back. So, the only countries that can directly help the Principality of Norton are the Andal Kingdom and the Idrid Kingdom that border it. What do the Idrid people say? Wilbert cast his eyes on Silverburn, the Duke of Home, who served as the Minister of the Seal. Just yesterday, he summoned the envoy from the Idrid Kingdom at the instruction of Wilbert. If the Andal Kingdom still has a choice, then the Idrid Kingdom will certainly not be able to sit idly by and watch what happens in the Principality of Norton. Because once the Principality of Norton is destroyed, the Idrid Kingdom on the peninsula will be completely isolated and helpless. King Idrid hopes that your majesty can lend a hand. Silverburn said in a deep voice. King Idrid has assembled an army of more than 30,000 people and stationed them on the border of the Principality of Norton, ready to intervene militarily at any time. What about the other countries? And the southern continent? As early as the Walrus Kingdom led its troops to the south, Wilbert sent a letter of request for help to the countries of the southern continent. Since everyone is a believer of the God of Light, they will not turn a deaf ear to the invasion of pagans, right? Even if they don't want to get involved, they still have to save face. The many principalities east of the Andal Kingdom can only put together a coalition of about 20,000 people. As for the countries in the southern continent, except for the Principality of Pelusia, which is willing to provide an expeditionary force of tens of thousands of people, the other countries in the southern continent have only agreed to provide food and financial assistance. Hearing this, Wilbert couldn't help but frown. Not enough. This is far from enough. Even if the 30,000 troops of the Kingdom of Idrid, the 20,000 coalition troops of the Eastern Principality, and the 10,000 expeditionary troops from the Principality of Pelissia are added. Even if the army of the Kingdom of Andal is not counted, the friendly forces on paper are almost the same as those of the Kingdom of Walrus. But the problem is, the same quantity does not mean the same quality. On one side are the militias pulled out from the fields to make up the numbers, and on the other side are the Walrus army known as savages. It is clear who is stronger and who is weaker. Even if the Kingdom of Andal puts aside all concerns and decides to intervene, the chances of winning this battle can only be considered 50-50. Your Majesty. Just as the discussion in the Imperial meeting was deadlocked, His Majesty's personal guard hurriedly placed a roll of croft paper on the desk of Wilbert I, and when Wilbert I's eyes swept over the words on the croft paper, His Majesty's face could not help but reveal an extremely obvious look of grief. Princess Keshia died suddenly. There was another sentence that Wilbert I had never said. That is, according to the inheritance law of the Duchy of Norton, after the death of Grand Duke Norton, Princess Keshia has become the only legal heir to the Duchy of Norton. The various inheritance laws in the Middle Ages are so damn complicated that I can't even think straight. Please don't delve into it. If you find any loopholes, you can point them out here. I'll refer to the book reviews before writing the next chapter. Chapter 185. Wilbert I decides to send troops. Under normal circumstances, there are many heirs to a country. Especially in this era, the royal families of the countries in the northern continent have formed a complex blood relationship through marriages. But the problem is that the Duchy of Norton is not a common case. The Duchy of Norton was born after the First Reconquista, and the sparseness of the Brandon family can even be compared with the Ximena family far away in Antilia. Therefore, the death of Princess Keshia means that the first heir to the title of Duke of Norton has died, and the direct bloodline of the Brandon family has been extinct. If the direct line is gone, look for the collateral line, and if the collateral line is gone, look for the in-laws. There will definitely be no one willing to inherit the title of Duke. For example, King Wilbert I Vandal is qualified to inherit the title of Duke of Norton. But the problem lies here. King Wilbert I Vandal is indeed qualified to inherit the title of Duke of Norton, but King Cristo I Vidred is also qualified to inherit this title. In this way, Wilbert I only had one option left, to send troops. Before this, the reason why he was repeatedly entangled between sending troops and not sending troops was actually because of insufficient benefits. Even if the Andal Kingdom and its allies drove the Walrus Kingdom back to the north, the Andal Kingdom, which had suffered heavy losses, would not get much benefit. After all, Princess Keshia is the first heir to Grand Duke Norton. Even if the Walrus people were driven back to the north, the territory of the Principality of Norton would still be in the hands of the Brandon family. And now, with the sudden death of Princess Keshia, the current situation became clear in an instant. At this time, the Principality of Norton was an extremely large piece of cake. Whether it was the Walrus people who went south, or monarchs with certain inheritance rights like King Cristo I Vidred and King Wilbert I Vandal, they could bite off a piece of meat from the Principality of Norton. Whoever conquered it would own it. If they just sit back and watch, then Idrit King Cristo I, who has decided to intervene, will certainly take the title of Duke of Norton. So, Andal Kingdom must intervene. Wilbert I said in a deep voice. Otherwise, whether it is Walrus Kingdom or Idrit Kingdom, whoever occupies the territory of the Principality of Norton will inevitably weaken the international status of Andal Kingdom. As you wish, Your Majesty. Seeing that the boss had made a decision, everyone in the Imperial meeting had to say yes. Previously, everyone was basically unwilling to send troops, mainly because the risk and benefits were not proportional. Now, although the risk is still there, the benefits that can be obtained have expanded by many times, and naturally everyone present can't say anything against it. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As for why Princess Keshia suddenly died, tisk tisk. I dare not guess, nor dare to think. Your Majesty is going to send troops. Antolia. As the Marquess of the Andal Kingdom, Leon naturally received a letter from the capital at the first time. You can take a look too. Leon waved his hand and told the waiter beside him to hand the letter in his hand to the old butler Aaron. And he simply leaned back in his chair, thinking about his next plan. Before, Leon only felt that the situation in the Principality of Norton would inevitably involve the nearby Andal Kingdom, but in fact, he did not think that Wilbert I would really make up his mind to send troops to Norton. After all, the civil war in the kingdom had just ended for less than a year. Wilbert I wanted to start a war again, which was undoubtedly overdrawing the national strength of the Andal kingdom. But this was also reasonable. The extinction of the direct bloodline of the Brandon family made the Principality of Norton a big cake coveted by everyone. Not to mention Wilbert I, even if it was Leon himself, if he had the opportunity to take such a vast piece of land into his pocket, he would probably have to go all in to try his luck. From the perspective of the Andal kingdom, His Majesty's order is quite unexpected. But for Anatolia, it is undoubtedly a great opportunity. After carefully scanning the words on the croft paper, Aaron suddenly raised his head, and a bright light flashed in his eyes. Obviously, Wilbert I also knew the current situation of the Andal kingdom. The eastern and northern parts of the kingdom have not recovered so far, so this is actually a very special conscription order. The general meaning can be summarized as follows: because the Andal kingdom is in a difficult time, although the king also wants to organize an army to help its neighbors, the army directly controlled by the king has long been crippled during the civil war, but the pagans have to be expelled, so the nobles of the kingdom are instructed to send troops on their own to help the Principality of Norton without mandatory requirements. In short, whoever conquers the land will own it, and no additional rewards will be given. How can this be unexpected? This is simply a stroke of genius. Leon couldn't help but sigh. Oh. The king obviously doesn't think that the nobles of the Andal kingdom can achieve much results on the land of the Duchy of Norton. His purpose is actually very simple, that is, the distribution of benefits after the war. There are the troops of the Kingdom of Idrid in the west, and the coalition forces of many duchies and the expeditionary force of the Duchy of Pelissia in the east. Under attack from both sides, the plan of the Walrus people to completely occupy the Duchy of Norton is bound to fail. If such an order is issued at this time, it will be good if the nobles of the Andal kingdom can achieve results. If not, when the benefits are divided after the war, the Andal kingdom will inevitably gain the reputation of sending troops. At least it will be able to occupy several earldoms or even duchies from the land of the Duchy of Norton. After all, no matter what, our king has a certain right of inheritance. Even if it is just a reputation, he will not return empty-handed. And since the land obtained will eventually be awarded, it is better to use it to stimulate the enthusiasm of the Andal nobles to participate in the war. At least the nobles in the western part of the kingdom will never be indifferent. The eastern part of the kingdom continues to recuperate, while the nobles in the western part of the kingdom, who have not suffered losses in the civil war, are eager to try. It would be great if they could win, but if they lose, at least they can bring the nobles from all over the country to the same level, which will take the opportunity to strengthen the royal family and consolidate the royal power. What does the Marquis plan to do? Aaron asked seriously. How is the exploration of the road from the southwest highlands to the Principality of Norton going? Hearing this, Leon asked in a deep voice. The garrison troops in the southwest highlands are clearing out the tall-legged strange birds along the way. If everything goes well, it will probably take another month. In that case, then take the shadow manipulator, and during this time, I will personally go to Wilsonburg to meet our elf queen. Chapter 186 Skeleton, this is my farmland. As the first city built by the Antorians in the abandoned land, Leon has always had high hopes for Fort Wilson. It may be a bit exaggerated to say that it is the City of World Desire, but even though it has not yet been completed, the title of the City of Desire in the abandoned land is almost within reach. The reason is that the city is not disturbed by the black fog, which is enough to make the city famous. Although the new city is just an outline at the moment, and even the outer walls have not yet been built, it has already had the momentum of a giant city. And what gives the city such momentum is naturally the world tree standing in the city. Under the careful care of the Antorians, the originally withered branches and leaves of the world tree have already presented a refreshing green. Under the influence of the world tree, countless flowers and plants bloomed around the city, so that this city, which is still under construction, is like a garden standing proudly on this land, a pure land on earth without the harassment of black fog. As time went by, the pioneers who moved from Anatolia had already passed the initial nervous stage. The wind column condensed by the shadow manipulator wandered over the city, but it never had any impact on the people living on this land. Instead, it became a wonder that the people talked about with relish, allowing them to imagine the past of this land during their daily rest. Of course, there are more people living around this city than just Anatolia. As the natives of this land, the Antolians are no longer surprised by the skeletons wandering outside the city. But the wandering skeletons will eventually trample on the crops that the people have worked so hard to plant, so that they have to build a hedge fence around the farmland. Fortunately, these skeletons with extremely simple brain circuits are as stupid as ever, and a fence that is not too high is enough to keep them out. Of course, not all skeletons are fools. For example, the skeletons whose hollow heads were stuffed with eternal fire by the Antolians gave birth to extremely simple consciousness. It seems that because the Antolians gave them intelligence, these white skeletons developed an inexplicable liking for the Antolians who came from afar. So much so that they began to spontaneously imitate human behavior and wield hoes in the farmland. For this reason, Andrew had to open up a special experimental field to satisfy the little skeleton's hobby of farming, and had people erect a wooden sign with a skull painted on it by the field to mark the ownership of the field. Faced with this move, the little skeletons were even more excited, as if they had found the meaning of skeleton life. This is their farmland. Whether it is day or night, they are wielding hoes in the field and weeding. However, because their skeletons are too old, every time the morning sun shines on this land, the Antolians will find a large pile of dead bones scattered on the ground in that farmland. The heavy farm work caused them to break bones. So Andrew had to arrange manpower again to dismantle and install the broken bones for the little skeletons. However, after tossing day after day, one of the skeletons seemed to have achieved a leap in thinking. It probably thought that the reason why the people in the territory were able to cultivate the fields well was because they rested at night. Although skeletons do not need to sleep, it seems that for them, imitating human behavior can help them find the meaning of life. So, when a sleeping resident woke up in the middle of the night and found a skeleton lying on his bed, the residents had to build a simple house for them next to the farmland taken care of by the skeletons. There was no way. After these days of getting along, even though the pioneers living on this land had already understood the harmless nature of these guys, the feeling of opening your eyes in the middle of the night and looking at a skeleton, I can only say that everyone understands. As for why the pioneers did not expel the skeletons, first, it was because their lords intended to observe whether the skeletons could become the arms of the Antolians after they had intelligence. Second, the details of the skeletons had not yet been figured out. If a skeleton king appeared after the expulsion, it would be too late to regret. The most important point was the third one. The Antolians were the messengers of peace, the representatives of win-win cooperation, and the saviors of all creatures and races in the abandoned land. Under the leadership of León Ximena, the Marquis of Antoria, they would revitalize this land and rekindle hope for the creatures living on this land. What? You ask, what is the use of setting up such a banner? Facts have proved that the results of doing so are very significant. For example, Alicia, the Queen of the Elves, took the initiative to come to Fort Wilson, hoping that the Antolians could save the elves from the dire straits. Because Fort Wilson had not yet been completed, even though Alicia was the Queen of the Elves, she could only live in the inn of Fort Wilson, waiting for Leon's arrival. However, the Queen is the Queen after all, and the elves must give face. Therefore, Jorny specially arranged Alicia to stay in a hostel built next to the World Tree. On the one hand, the elves can feel the sincerity of the Antolians, and on the other hand, the lush greenery of the World Tree is enough to pry Alicia's trembling heart again and again. The World Tree in the Moon Shadow Forest is indeed tall and sturdy. But, the yellowing and falling leaves are impacting the hearts of the elves again and again. You know, before the Antolians set foot on this land, the branches and leaves of this World Tree were also withered and shriveled. Everything Alicia saw with her own eyes will undoubtedly become the best bargaining chip for the Antolians. Your Majesty. When the young Marquis of Antolia pushed the door open under the guidance of the maid, Alicia was leaning against the window in a daze. Under her delicate eyelashes, her trembling eyes were like deep pools of water, silently looking at the birds that rested on the branches of the World Tree, listening to their melodious and beautiful voices. Not to mention the trees that were gradually losing their vitality. Even the birds and beasts that were once very common in the Moon Shadow Forest now seemed to have become quite rare. Leon. After hearing Leon's voice, the Elf Queen, who had been staring at the World Tree, woke up as if from a dream, and cast her eyes on the young human Marquis. I heard from Jorny that the Moon Elves are going to make another deal with the Antolians. At this moment, Leon's face showed a perfect smile. It's my birthday today, and I'm reminiscing about the past. Suddenly I found that I'm already 22 years old. Please subscribe. You can subscribe when the pace is slow, but don't just run away. PS. Wish me a happy birthday. Chapter 187 Elf Longbowman. Antolian Foreign Legion. Leon knew very well what Alicia was here for. Alicia also knew very well what Leon wanted to blackmail. But even though she had been prepared in her heart, she was still trembling with anger after hearing the conditions Leon offered. The elves will never surrender to humans. Alicia said without hesitation, "This is impossible. Absolutely impossible." Alicia's answer was naturally within Leon's expectations. If Leon were asked to use one word to describe the racial characteristics of the Moon Elves, then this word would not be beauty or elegance, but pride. The Moon Elves have always had their own pride. Even before encountering the Antolians, the Moon Elves living on this land had always been extremely closed under the siege of Black Fog, and even regarded themselves as the last wise men in the abandoned land. So, Leon's previous condition, the proposal to surrender to the Antolians and obtain the Shadow Manipulator, was naturally rejected by Alicia without hesitation. Anyway, Leon was just trying to make a suggestion, to impact the elf psychological defenses first, so that his subsequent demands would not seem too outrageous. As for whether the elves would overturn the table, Leon didn't believe it anyway. At present, it was the elves who needed the humans, not the humans who needed the elves. Leon was already in an invincible position, and it was just a matter of profit. In that case, Leon's face showed a little embarrassment. Then what kind of chips are the Moon Elves going to offer? Hearing this, Alicia was a little stunned for a while. To be honest, the reason why she came to Wilsonburg was completely impromptu. Although she brought 2 Moon Elf elders, she didn't even think about what price she should offer. She only knew that she had to trade with the Antolians to let the Moon Elves' world tree regain vitality. As for what price the Moon Elves had to pay, it seemed the elves really didn't have anything to show for it. The Moon Elves had 3 treasures. The first is the seed of the world tree, but the Antolians already have the seedling of the world tree. The second is the fire of the eternal fire, but during the first transaction, the Antolians also got a lot, and it seems that they have no intention of continuing to ask for more. As for the third treasure, the Moon Spring Water, even the Moon Elves themselves don't have much, and they have always counted by drops. If your Majesty has not made up your mind, you can go back and think about it. I am not in a hurry. I will lead the troops out in a few days and will be back in a few months," Leon said sympathetically. The Antolians can wait, but the Moon Elves can't. Wait? When Leon had already stepped out of the door, Alicia finally sighed and said, 3 drops of Moon Spring Water. As the Marquess of Antolia, Leon certainly knew what Moon Spring Water was. Even if he didn't know it before, Journey, who served as the plenipotentiary ambassador of Antolia to the Moon Shadow Forest, was not a freeloader. While idling around and writing a book, Johnny had already learned everything about the Moon Elves. The Moon Elves got their name from the Moon Spring Water. It is said that this magical spring water has the effect of reviving the dead and turning bones into flesh. Although the actual use is not as exaggerated as the legend, it is enough to make an old elder glorious and to keep a dying person alive. And although it is called spring water, the so-called Moon Spring is actually just a dry well in the Moon Shadow Forest. It was almost dry thousands of years ago, and even the spring water that can be collected in a year is only a few drops. What else? Leon sat down at the table again. 3 drops of Moon Spring Water can be accumulated by the elves in just 1 year. But if the Shadow Manipulator is used to save the only world tree in the world that has already entered adulthood, it can be called a 1,000-year plan for the Moon Elves. So according to the conditions offered by Alicia, the current transaction is not equal. What else does the Marquis want? Clemente, the Moon Elf Elder, took the initiative to speak. As an old elf who has lived for 144 years, he thought he had already seen through the cunning nature of the Antolians, who would not release the eagle until they saw the rabbit, but would dig the rabbit hole when they saw the rabbit. If Alicia continued to follow Leon's words, I am afraid that the Moon Elves would sooner or later become dependent on humans. I've heard that the longbowmen of the Moon Elves are all very brave. Even if they are 300 or 500 meters apart, they can hit the target every time. Does the Marquis want the warriors of the elf clan to serve you? Clemente frowned. What's the difference between this and pledging allegiance to humans? There is a difference. Of course there is a difference. Elder Clemente can understand it as a mercenary. Oh, in human society, mercenaries are soldiers who get paid by participating in wars. Antolia provides shadow manipulators, and the Moon Elves provide longbowmen. This is an equal exchange. Leon curled his lips and denied the wrong perception of the Moon Elves elder on the spot. Nowadays, the Antolians do have a repeating crossbow, but the current repeating crossbow is only the first generation model after all, with an effective range of only more than 100 meters. With Wilbert's official decision to send troops to intervene in the chaos in Norton, Leon naturally has to pick a peach for himself from the hands of the Principality of Norton. If we can have the help of the elven longbowmen, when the steam cannon is still in the conception stage, it can be regarded as barely making up for the defect of insufficient long-range firepower. Minimizing casualties while achieving results has always been Leon's pursuit. After all, there are too few pure native Antolians. Even though Leon has encouraged childbirth in the land of Antolia, the refugees packed from all over the kingdom also occupy a considerable part. Before these people are completely assimilated into the traditions and customs of Antolia, even after assimilation, the life of every Antolian soldier is precious. Hearing this, Alicia couldn't help but look at Clemente. According to Leon, this is not called loyalty, this is called mercenaries obtained through equal exchange. It seems. It's not completely unacceptable, right? And theoretically, pure-ranged troops like the elven longbowmen shouldn't suffer too much damage. Plus, the moon elves are in need of help now, so maybe they can take this opportunity to observe the military strength of humans. Okay. Alicia nodded after all. Although it sounds a bit strange to ask the elven longbowmen to fight for humans, but the situation makes it so. Compared with the threat of the Black Mist, the conditions offered by the Antolians are already acceptable. Chapter 188 Southwest Highlands, the Pearl of Antolia. Leon was obviously very satisfied with the harvest of this trip. Although in front of the elves, Leon always looked like he had suffered a big loss. But in fact, the production cost of the shadow manipulator was there. It was just because the moon elves happened to be controlled by the black fog, and the world tree showed a decline under the influence of the black fog, which allowed Leon to open his mouth and gain more benefits for Antolia. In short, after 3 stages of frank exchange of opinions, enhancing mutual understanding, and cordial and friendly conversation, the Antolians have achieved considerable results. The Antolians will provide the moon elves with 6 shadow manipulators in 3 months, and their range of action can just cover the entire moon shadow forest. The moon elves, who already have something to ask of others, will provide the Ximena family with 3 drops of moon spring water, 80 seeds of eternal fire, and 450 elven longbowmen. In addition, the elves will provide the Antolians with map information of the explored areas of the abandoned land in the next 12 natural months. These elven longbowmen provided by the moon elves were led by the elf elder Clemente and temporarily incorporated into the Antolian Foreign Legion. It was impossible to return them. Leon had never considered the issue of returning them from the beginning to the end, because it was clearly written in the mercenary agreements signed with the elves. As long as the 6 shadow manipulators were still in the hands of the moon elves, these elven longbowmen had to serve the Antolians. This was not only Leon's idea, but also Alicia's idea. If they had to be returned after use, who knows if the cunning humans would let the fragile elves take the lead? In Alicia's view, only by letting these elves serve humans for a long time, the damn stingy human noble named León Ximena, who opened his mouth for a big mouth, would know how to cherish them. What's more, although they were unwilling to admit it from the bottom of their hearts, the elders of the moon elves, including the elf queen Alicia, had already realized the power of humans. It might not be a bad thing to let a small number of elves live on human land. Elder Clemente even went against all odds and specially provided Leon with 2 elf maids. He hoped to consolidate the friendly relationship between the Antorians and the moon elves through daily influence. One is called Angelica and the other is called Finna. As for Leon, he naturally accepted the kindness of the elves. Trust is definitely not a problem. But when the Foreign Legion of Antoria, the elf longbowmen, makes a grand appearance, this race that only appeared in the legends of the bards will inevitably reappear in the vision of humans. And when it comes to the noble banquet, Leon will bring 2 elf maids with him. Tisk tisk. This is the face. Of course, the most worthy of Leon's attention is naturally the 450 elf longbowmen from the Moon Shadow Forest. It has to be said that the elves are still very good looking. Although the elves who have lived in the abandoned land for a long time and are surrounded by black fog also have few full meals, compared with those ordinary humans with pale faces and thin bodies, their appearance can no longer be said to be a gift from God. It is simply that God kneels on the ground and pours it into the mouths of the elves. The elves, both men and women, have a face second only to the readers. If the Antolian mercenaries are as strong as giant bears, then the elf longbowmen are as agile as swimming birds. At the same time, their slender arms actually contain a power that Leon cannot understand at all. Coupled with the elf special bows and arrows, their effective attack range has completely exceeded any archer unit of this era. When the group and the elves passed through the narrow Bergori Pass, Leon's vision instantly widened. So, after thinking for a moment, Leon said to the commander of the elven longbowmen, the elven elder Clemente, the elven longbowmen will temporarily stay in the southwest highlands with a Lapric legion, and take advantage of this period of time to run in more. No problem. Even though Clemente, who is already 144 years old, had always been an elf who thought he was calm and steady, when he set foot on this land where there was no trace of black fog, he was like Elt at that time, and fell into deep shock. If the Antorians could really dispel the black fog in the entire abandoned land, then Clemente could not imagine it. Today's Southwest Highlands can be said to be the most noisy place in the entire Antoria. If we only talk about the liveliness, I am afraid that even the Thorn territory is slightly inferior. There is no way, if it is set in the previous life, the Thorn territory can be regarded as the capital. It is less wanton and noisy, and more untouchable. On the other hand, the Southwest Highlands, as the first land that Leon ordered to be developed, there are salt lakes and mineral deposits on the Southwest Highlands. Mining requires manpower, and so does drying salt. The influx of a large number of people has made most of the people who make a living on this land heavy manual laborers, and they have also become the refugees who are assimilated to the traditions of Antolia the fastest. Drinking a little wine and chatting on weekdays is natural. As we all know, the coming-of-age ceremony for Antolia boys is to hunt wild animals in the mountains and forests. In the Southwest Highlands, the most wild animals are none other than those tall-legged strange birds living on the highlands. Therefore, even the originally weak refugees, after going through the baptism of heavy labor and finally being able to fill their stomachs, actually showed a kind of bravery they had never had before. The so-called influence of the environment on people may be like this. And if the Antolians can really open up the road from the Southwest Highlands to the Principality of Norton, then there is no doubt that the Southwest Highlands, a land with a relatively low average altitude and even with rivers flowing through it, will surely become one of the most dazzling pearls in the hands of the Ximena family. You know, the pearl of the Ximena family is a real pearl. This is not like a certain unnamed empire on which the sun never sets. No matter how bad the former colonies were, they were pearls per capita anyway. So, whether it is to make this land shine more brightly, or simply to allow the Ximena family to obtain a larger population and more vast land, opening up the mountain road to the Principality of Norton, Leon, is imperative. Chapter 189 Leon's interrogation method is too advanced. For most humans, elves are rare species, and were once thought to have disappeared in the long river of history. Therefore, most of them had only heard of the name of elves in legends. Even though the news that the young and promising Marcus had had some contact with the elves a few days ago had spread, and the elves even sent messengers. But because Elt had always traveled light and went straight to the Thorn territory, the people living in the Southwest Highlands had never actually seen elves. And now, 450 elf longbowmen suddenly appeared in the Southwest Highlands, naturally attracting countless civilians who were taking a break to come and watch. These are elves. Still alive. Picking any one of them from the team is enough to be called a handsome man or a beautiful woman, which naturally makes these big and strong countrymen in Antolia amazed again and again. But, compared with the people of the territory who were amazed at the appearance of the elves, what Leon was most concerned about was actually the combat power of these elf longbowmen. These 450 elven longbowmen are the important military force for Antolia to march into the Principality of Norton. You know, Leon has never been a greedy person. Although most of the nobles of this era are cannibals, Leon feels that his thinking has always been relatively clear. Even though he has decided to send troops this time, he actually does not expect to be able to divide up much of the territory that originally belonged to the Principality of Norton in this war. After all, if too much land is occupied at one time, even if there is no siege against Antolia, even if it is just the impact of overexpansion penalty, it is not something that Antolia can easily bear now. The so-called overexpansion penalty is actually a game term from EU4. In short, if too much land is occupied at one time, then there will be debuffs from multiple levels such as territory rebellion correction, stability correction, diplomatic reputation correction, annual corruption correction, faction influence correction, and territory trade competitiveness correction. It is precisely because of the above that, although Leon has made up his mind to get a piece of the pie, He also needs to pay a little attention to the international outlook of Anatolia and the Ximena family to avoid dragging down the development of the entire Anatolia. Therefore, Leon's goal for this dispatch of troops to Anatolia has always been very clear. The Anatolian army will set out from the southwest highlands and advance westward to capture the port of Eider, the seaport in the south of the Principality of Norton. As long as the port of Eider is in hand, the Anatolians will not seek to continue to expand the results of the war. The so-called stop when you see the good is the same. Otherwise, if you lose your mind because of the smooth war and blindly raise the established strategic goals, then the Anatolian army will inevitably be trapped in the Norton quagmire. And this is something Leon must be vigilant about. Afghanistan, which was called the graveyard of the empire in the last life, is a good example. And now the Principality of Norton has also been in a mess. With the capture of Bolton by the army of the Kingdom of Walrus, the war in the entire Principality of Norton is no longer a joint effort of the northern pagans, the remnants of the Restoration, and the Norton nobles. It won't be long before the Kingdom of Andal, the Kingdom of Idrit, and even the coalition forces from the east and the expeditionary forces from the southeast will also set foot on the battlefield. In addition, the nobles of Norton have already fought on their own. To be honest, even Leon, who could bet on Wilbur I without hesitation during the civil war in the Kingdom of Andal, can hardly judge the final direction of the war in the Principality of Norton from this pot of hodgepodge. Otherwise, he would not have made a special trip to the abandoned land to bring back 450 elven longbowmen to Anatolia to strengthen Anatolia's military strength. Just like the ancient Chinese saying that Leon had always heard before he traveled through time, warfare is a major matter of a country, a place of life and death, a way of survival and destruction, and it must be carefully considered. Even though he was confident in the strength of the Anatolian army, he still needed to be 100% vigilant and make every possible effort. For example, it was an extremely important step for Leon to interrogate the 2 believers of the Restoration relics imprisoned in the Thorn territory before he ordered the troops to go out. It was precisely for this reason that after arranging the temporary station of the elven longbowmen, Leon rushed back to the Thorn territory without stopping. Compared with the army of the Principality of Norton in the north, the relics of the Restoration relics entrenched in the south of the Principality of Norton were the main enemies that the Anatolians had to face. It happened that the dungeon of the Thorn territory held 2 believers of the Restoration relics brought back from the Principality of Norton by the Anatolian caravan, so Leon naturally had to interrogate them carefully. At least he had to find out the purpose of the relics of the Restoration relics suddenly appearing, right? How are the people? Compared to the vibrant life on the ground, the dungeon was filled with a depressing atmosphere. Leon stepped on the slightly cold stone slab and asked the guard beside him. Hearing this, the guard who was walking in front of Leon couldn't help but shudder. They are all still alive. According to your request, the 2 prisoners have been kept separately. Because Leon personally took care of it, saying that he wanted to give the 2 remnants of the Restoration who were imprisoned here a stronger punishment. So, being imprisoned in a dark and narrow black room can only be said to be an appetizer. Punishments such as water torture and prohibition of sleep are even more repeated. Many of these methods are unheard of even by the guards in the dungeon. And the most important thing is that because Leon had never considered interrogating the 2 believers of the Restoration immediately, so for more than a month, the Anatolians just tortured them blindly, so that the 2 prisoners imprisoned in the dungeon almost felt that they would have a mental breakdown in the next second. But this is what they deserve. The reason why the remnants of the Restoration of the nation are notorious throughout the entire northern continent is not just because of their so-called slogan of reviving the Holy Brun Empire. Looking at all kinds of human tragedies that have occurred in various countries in the northern continent, the remnants of the Restoration of the nation are mostly behind them. Bang! When the guards in the dungeon finally opened the heavy door lock, the prisoner who had been tortured to death for a long time couldn't even raise his head to look at the person who came. The Marcus is here. It was not until the guards in the dungeon poured a basin of cold water on his head that the prisoner covered in blood was suddenly startled, and his eyes stared at the blurry figure in front of him. He wanted to speak, but coughed up a pool of blood. Leon waved his hand, signaling the people behind him to slowly retreat. "Whatever I ask, you have to answer," Leon said lightly. I say." The prisoner tied to the cross nodded with great difficulty. "You know, he has been waiting for this moment for a long time. During this period, he was subjected to endless torture every day. Such experiences had already brought his mental state to the brink of collapse. Compared to being imprisoned in this dungeon without seeing the sun, it would be better for him to die. So, how can I become a believer in the restoration of the country? León walked up to the prisoner and asked sincerely. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190. León doesn't like middlemen making a profit from the price difference. When León finished speaking, Ansis Birch was completely confused. Although the torture of these days has brought him to the brink of collapse, he had always believed that his hearing should not be a problem. He widened his eyes and tried hard to see the blurry figure in front of him in the extreme dizziness. However, seeing that the prisoner in front of him had not given an answer, León was already a little impatient. How can I become a believer of the remnant of the restoration? This is the last time I ask. This time, Ansis was very sure that he heard the nobleman's question clearly. It seems. It is possible. Probably. The nobleman in front of him is asking how to become a believer of the remnant of the restoration of the country? This made his brain go down for a while. León has been patiently observing the prisoner in front of him. Of course, he doesn't really want to join them. The remnant of the restoration of the country is notorious throughout the northern continent, and its reputation is roughly the same as that of the terrorist organization in the previous life. He would not pursue immortality or anything like that if he was not a noble. To become a believer of the remnant of the restoration of the nation. Pursuit of immortality. If the revival of the Holy Brun Empire has always been the slogan of the remnant of the restoration of the nation, then the pursuit of immortality is the fundamental reason why this notorious organization can drag many nobles into the water. In fact, this is not difficult to understand. The nobles have power, soldiers and food, and they already have everything they can have. The only thing they don't have is eternal life. The remnant of the restoration of the nation may really just want to restore the glory of the Holy Brun Empire, but now, this slogan is just a slogan, and its spiritual core has long changed. It is for this reason that this group of people are called believers. The reason why León chose to use become a believer of the remnant of the restoration of the nation as his opening is naturally to avoid all possible risks. Just like the world tree far away in the abandoned land, it can sense the vigorous vitality of the world tree seedling growing in Antilia. Every believer of the restoration relics has a tattoo containing magical power. In León's opinion, it is probably a magic circuit that he cannot understand at present. Once a believer thinks that he has betrayed, the repentance will resonate with a magic circuit, and the believer's body will be reduced to ashes by the blazing fire. In summary, León was not in a hurry to interrogate the prisoner in front of him. Let people torture him for more than half a month, and then interrogate him when his spirit is almost collapsed. How can he care about repentance in his mind? What's more, León is talking about joining the restoration relics. This is the double insurance that Lord León added to this interrogation. And as León expected, when León started to ask questions, Anthis was already ready to be burned by the fire. But what he didn't expect was, this noble who tortured him for so long, his purpose was to become a believer of the restoration relics? Maybe in the past, Ansis would have doubted and pondered. But now, Ansis's spirit on the verge of collapse, how could he think about these things? Of course, it doesn't matter even if he doubts. Because just as Ansis was hesitating whether to speak, a skeleton head with lifeless eyes popped out from behind León. That was the vegetable-growing skeleton that León brought back from the abandoned land. A dark cell, a skeleton with empty eyes, and a noble who was looking at him sincerely. This scene, this conversation. No matter how you look at it, León's words don't seem false. Moreover, he hasn't become a believer in the restoration of the country, but he has even made a skeleton. This is simply a self-taught, extremely pious, immortal, and SSS-level wild believer with his own property. As the only Marquess of the Andal Kingdom now, the power of the Ximena family is definitely not weaker than that of the other nobles. If they have my help, it will definitely be beneficial to the remnants of the restoration. Okay, I say. Ansis almost exhausted all his strength and nodded heavily. When León finally walked out of the dungeon, the bright warm sun shone on his shoulders, dispelling the shadow behind him. This interrogation was fruitful. Among the believers of the remnants of the restoration, Ansis was considered a middle-level person who is quite appreciated by his superiors. It was precisely because of this identity that Leon not only pried out a lot of secrets about the remnants of the Restoration from his mouth, but also made him have a more detailed consideration of the plan to send troops to the Principality of Norton. The reason why the remnants of the Restoration suddenly jumped out was naturally not without reason. According to ANSYS, only war can cover up the disappearance of a large number of people on a large scale, and only then can the remnants of the Restoration of the nation capture enough bait in the chaos of the Principality of Norton. As for the reason for doing this, I am afraid that only the actual controllers of the few remnants of the Restoration of the nation can know it. But although the specific reason is unclear, Leon has become more determined to send troops. Anyway, what the remnants of the Restoration of the nation are planning will definitely not be a good thing. As a messenger of peace, a representative of friendship, and a kind-hearted Leon will naturally not sit idly by. If the refugees who should have been caused by the war are all ruined by the remnants of the Restoration of the nation, then where can Leon pack the refugees to open up the abandoned land? Exclamation mark. You know, the vast territory of the abandoned land cannot be opened up by relying on the hundreds of thousands of people in Anatolia now. This is the most direct contradiction between the Ximena family and the remnants of the Restoration of the nation. But to be honest, for Leon, the involvement of the remnants of the Restoration is not all bad. After all, if the plan is well made, there is a lot to be done. Although this is a world with magical power, the feudal fiefdom system is the cornerstone of the political system of this era. As a traverser, enfeoffment of territory and enfeoffment of vassals will always be your last resort. How sweet it is to have a directly governed territory. There are no middlemen to make a profit. If the territory that he had worked so hard to conquer from the Principality of Norton is eventually to be divided, Leon will be really heartbroken. So in fact, long before he decided to send troops, Leon had already made plans. Even if he risked the negative effect of reducing the favorability of the vassal by 10, he had to completely cut off the possibility of entering the abandoned land from the northwest. And now, there are remnants of the Restoration in the south of the Principality of Norton, so Leon has a lot more means to operate behind the scenes. The territory that the Anatolians conquered with their lives must be directly governed. Chapter 191, Leon's decision to loan troops. The next day. Thorn territory. León Ximena, the Marquess of Anatolia, officially issued the 23rd Executive Order of Anatolia. From now on, the Anatolia War Bond Committee will be formally established, with Aaron, the butler of the Ximena family, as the chairman of the committee, and Bello, the mayor of the mining town, and Philip Ximena, the temporary chief of Shanmulan, as deputies, fully responsible for the sales of the first batch of war bonds in Anatolia. There is no way. Since the decision has been made to send troops, war funds must be raised after all. So is Leon short of money at this time? In fact, it is not. Although Anatolia's current financial situation is a little tight due to a large amount of infrastructure construction and the development of abandoned lands, the gold, silver and jewelry contributed by the Bravis family are really countless. Therefore, the money needed for this military expedition can actually be gathered by gritting one's teeth. It's another day full of gratitude to the Duke of Galicia. But even so, Leon decided to borrow money. This is not because he has a masochistic tendency. After taking on a mortgage and a car loan in the last life, he has to take on a war loan in this life. The main reason is that Leon hopes to use this opportunity to test the waters and see if the nobles and the civilians of Anatolia have enough confidence in this type of financial product. If not, then take this opportunity to build confidence. After all, relying solely on the money and food of the Anatolians, the comprehensive development of the abandoned land is undoubtedly a foolish dream. Only by borrowing, or borrowing enough debts, can the Ximena family truly stand firm. Only then can the development of the abandoned land be further put on the agenda. If the issuance of this war bond can really gain something, then Leon will firmly and without hesitation start his aristocratic life of borrowing and opening up wasteland after the war. So, Anatolia Bank Head Office. This world's first primitive financial institution, born out of the gold rush, has finally opened up a third business after wealth savings and loan issuance, war bonds. The annualized yield of 3-month war bonds is 3.2%, the annualized yield of 6-month war bonds is 4.6%, and the annualized yield of 1-year war bonds is 5.7%. This is a major decision made by Leon after comprehensively considering the duration of bonds, systemic risks, expected inflation rate and Anatolia's own debt repayment ability. After all, With the further prevalence of the gold rush, the influx of a large amount of money has caused some prices in the Thorn territory to show signs of rising. By issuing bonds to temporarily collect some liquidity and reduce the funds in the market, it is also beneficial to maintain the stability of prices in Anatolia. However, for the civilians of this era, even for the nobles of this era, the operation of issuing bonds is somewhat too advanced. What's more, Leon's war bonds are not only for the nobles in the south of the kingdom. He even fully considered the situation of gold diggers, craftsmen in Anatolia's high-income groups, and specially issued a part of small-denomination war bonds. War bonds. As the news of the issuance of war bonds spread, the surroundings of Anatolia Bank were suddenly surrounded by people who were curious. The acceptance of new things by Anatolians has always been very high. After all, this is Anatolia. In this land full of miracles, there are even trees that can grow stones. It is not surprising to issue war bonds now. What's more, war bonds. Anything related to war can attract the attention of the Anatolians to the greatest extent. The Marquis intends to send troops to the Principality of Norton to occupy a wider area and attract more people. There is no need for civilians to participate in this expedition. The only problem is the lack of funds. If you are willing to support, you can actively buy it. The Marquis guarantees with his own reputation that he will definitely return your money on time. Not only will it be returned, but also with interest. Considering that the current cultural level of the Anatolians is still at the level of per capita prenatal education, the employees of the Anatolian Bank simply shouted on the street. Those who knew understood that they were selling bonds, and those who didn't thought they were watching a monkey show. But what was completely beyond Leon's expectation was that after only one day, the small denomination bonds prepared by Leon for his own people had been sold out. How could it be so fast? This time, even Leon himself, who had come up with such a fancy thing as war bonds, could not help but be shocked by the strong purchasing power of the Antorians. When did his subjects become so rich? It's mainly because of the name of this bond. Aaron sat in front of Leon and answered helplessly, any native Antorian has experienced the taste of war firsthand. The hounds attacking the city every year of the jackdaw has long become a memory buried deep in the hearts of every Antorian. Although this expedition only requires the active soldiers of Antoria, this is Antoria, and the United Antorians will always be the strongest backing of the Antorian army. Even if the Marquis does not return, the Antorians will certainly join in. As for those refugees who have just arrived in Antoria, the refugees are ignorant but not stupid. The natives of Antoria are so active, and the refugees are naturally unwilling to lag behind. At this point, Aaron's face couldn't help but show a trace of obvious pride. It must be paid back. Leon clenched the armrest of his chair and said without hesitation, war bonds are just an introduction, just a benchmark for establishing credit for bonds. Leon's real target has always been the richest people in the kingdom of Andal, the nobles. However, even in the eyes of the Anatolians, buying war bonds is regarded as support for the Marquis, and they are regarded as assistance to relatives, friends and brothers. But in the eyes of other nobles, your Marquis is really a talent. When the envoy from Anatolia placed a war bond issued by the Anatolian Bank on the table in front of the Earl of Greywater Castle, Eli Wayne, could not help but utter a heartfelt admiration. Why didn't he come up with such a wonderful way to make money? Exclamation mark. My Lord Earl, my Marquis will definitely return it in the end, otherwise I wouldn't want to ask you to set this example. The envoy from Anatolia had to explain earnestly. As soon as the words came out, the Count of Greywater Castle, who was originally praising Leon's operation, was stuck. No way? You still want to buy it? Okay. Since it's the order of the Marquis, I'll buy it. Eli Wayne only thought for a moment and said without hesitation. There is no way. The Count of Greywater Castle has recently felt a sense of crisis. Since his fiefdom is close to Anatolia, the Wayne family has made up their minds early on to completely turn to the current Marquis. He wants to be the most loyal running dog under the Ximena family. However, just when the Count of Greywater Castle was excited and outsourced the entire territory's defense to the Anatolians, Viscount Cummings, who owns the city of Parma, came out halfway. Even though that guy is not Leon's vassal, he has also turned to Leon in reality. The degree of his father's kindness and filial piety is not even weaker than that of Greywater Castle. As for the interest on the bonds, the Earl dared not even think about the return that Leon promised. In his opinion, as long as he could get back the principal he invested, everything would be fine. I just saw a reader in the book Friends Circle today saying that I was sick. As a result, I took my temperature on a whim at night and found that I really had a fever. Not only did I have a fever, but I also felt dizzy. The reader predicted something. Please stop using your magic. Woo-woo. Chapter 192. Antolia's military forces enter a state of war readiness. The sale of war bonds was unexpectedly smooth. Needless to say, the small value bonds for the civilians of Antolia were snapped up by the civilians of Antolia as soon as they were released. Even the large value war bonds, specially prepared for the nobles, were also smooth sailing in the sales process. Firstly, it was because León himself was the lord of many southern nobles, and this face had to be given after all. Secondly, it was because the southern nobles had enough confidence in Antolia's ability to repay its debts. After all, the gold mine of Ximena was there. Even the gold diggers made a lot of money in this process. As the actual controller of the Ximena gold mine, the repayment ability of the Ximena family was naturally beyond doubt. Even if it was not good, the principal invested should be able to be recovered, right? When will the road to the Principality of Norton be opened? León could no longer remember how many times he had asked this question in the past few days. Today, Antolia not only has sufficient food and funds in place, but also the army of Antolia has been assembled. Once the road is opened, we can advance westward from the southwest highlands, from top to bottom, towards the south of the Principality of Norton, launching a blitzkrieg that is beyond everyone's expectations. However, the most critical point to realize this plan is that the road to the Principality of Norton has been difficult to open. This is not because the Laprit Corps, who are familiar with the mountainous terrain, cannot pass through the mountains and forests that block it. The main problem is actually the transportation of subsequent baggage supplies. Wars are not just about the army, but also about money and food. Even though the Antolian army is extremely brave, its combat effectiveness will be greatly reduced if it lacks logistical supplies. If it were other noble armies, they would just rob the logistics supplies on the spot. But at this moment, at least in León's heart, he had already regarded the land in the south of the Principality of Norton as the Ximena family's possession. Since it will soon become the land in his hands, he naturally has to find a way to make it perfect. Let's release the elk geese. At the latest military meeting, León finally made a decision. Since it is difficult to open up a stable food route in the shortest time with the manpower of Antolia alone, other means can only be used. And the elk geese, a strange creature known as the forest destroyer, naturally became the choice on the table. With a stubborn head and poor eyesight, it is natural for them to knock down trees blocking the road. My Lord Marcus. After hesitating for a moment, Aaron finally said, those elk geese raised outside the Thorn territory were raised with great difficulty. Although they can be caught again later, there will inevitably be certain losses. Let them go. León shook his head and said without hesitation, let someone use the skeletons of Highland hounds to drive them away. The situation in the Principality of Norton can no longer allow us to delay any further. You know, León has never been a radical lord. But the situation in the Principality of Norton is just as León said, it has been deteriorating at a visible speed. Nowadays, the southern part of the Principality of Norton has almost become the private reserve of the remnants of the Restoration. Although its military strength is not as strong as that of the Kingdom of Walrus, its purpose is more sinister. The pagans of the Kingdom of Walrus still want people and land, but those damn remnants of the Restoration. If they are allowed to collect enough bait in the south of the Principality of Norton, then what is the point of the Antolians sending troops to the Principality of Norton? No matter how fertile the land is, no matter how important the location is, it still needs the support of the population. According to the intelligence from the west of the kingdom, the western nobles of the Andal kingdom have assembled an army of tens of thousands and have begun to advance towards the Principality of Norton. And the kingdom of Idrid has already had an encounter with the iron cavalry of the kingdom of Walrus, and the battle was extremely tragic. Time waits for no one. Everyone. León's eyes swept over the generals present, and an indescribable confidence emerged in his heart. Yes, in terms of the number of troops alone, Antolia is indeed difficult to compare with the other armies. But if the quality of the army is taken into consideration, then the Antolia soldiers under León will never be afraid of any opponent. Otherwise, he would not have decided to march westward in this chaotic situation. In that case, then I will follow the Marquis's orders. Seeing that his lord had already made a decision, Aaron would not sabotage it. On the contrary, he immediately made a promise to León, I will let Bella personally lead people to keep an eye on it. In a week, even if we can't build a cement mountain road to the Principality of Norton, we can at least build a sufficiently flat dirt road, which will definitely not delay the Marquis's battle plan." Hearing Aaron's promise, Leon nodded with satisfaction. As his eyes swept over the many generals sitting around, everyone present also realized that their Marquis was about to start selecting generals. Thinking of this, Juan, the commander of the Antolian militia, couldn't help but straighten his back, fearing that Leon would ignore him again. In the recent rounds of errands, such as opening up abandoned lands and inquiring about the situation in Norton, the Antolian militia could be said to have not grabbed any. If there is no mission, where can I brush military merits? Where can I get rewards? Don't hold on from there. Leon glanced at Juan helplessly and said, Antolia has now established 3 new garrison corps, so, this time, the Antolia militia, the Laprit corps and the Antolia mercenaries must all go. The elven longbowmen must follow. As for the defense of Antolia. At this point, Leon couldn't help but cast his eyes on Todd. "You come to guard the house?" "Yes, Lord Marcus." Compared to several young generals who are eager to try, Todd is more calm after all, and makes Leon more at ease. With him and Aaron working together, he doesn't have to worry about the stability of the rear at least. You know, in addition to several newly established garrison corps, Antolia's main corps can be said to be out in full force this time. After all, although on the surface, the remnants of the restoration of the country entrenched in the southern part of the Principality of Norton do not seem to be strong in military strength, Leon is still 100% vigilant. Who knows what hidden cards those believers who are not even humanoids will have, and what impressive tricks they will come up with. Pass the order, the 3 main armies of Antolia will assemble in the Southwest Highlands. A week later, send troops to Norton. There are only 10 minutes left until September. Since the author is writing this while sick, please vote for me at the beginning of the month. Chapter 193, Dispatch of Troops. March westward. War is coming. As León Ximena, the Marquis of Antolia, officially issued the No. 2 order to mobilize the military forces of Antolia, all the people living on this land realized this at the same time. However, the Antolians will never be afraid of the coming of war. On the contrary, as the Antolian army began to gather in the direction of the Southwest Highlands, the Antolians seemed to have an inexplicable power in their bones, and even the work in their hands was done more vigorously. Even those refugees who had recently moved from all over the kingdom were mostly affected by this atmosphere and glowed with a spirit that they had never had before. If Leon was asked to use one word to summarize this trait of the Antolians, it would undoubtedly be unity. If the Antolians had not been able to unite and hold together every time they encountered difficulties, I am afraid that Antolia would have become a deserted place in the south of the Andal kingdom under the harassment of the Year of the Jackdaw. It is precisely because of this extremely special atmosphere in this era that the culture of Antolia has a very strong assimilation ability for the refugees who migrated from other places. Even many refugees have only been here for less than a year, and they have already regarded Antolia as their homeland in their hearts, and always use those native Antolians as examples and benchmarks. There is no way. Although Leon also exploits the people, it depends on who you compare with. At least in this era, Leon's exploitation of the people can be called kind. Although most of the people have no vacation at all, Leon at least gave them a job to support themselves and gave them the opportunity to fill their stomachs. And this is enough to make the people content and make them work hard for the Ximena family. Perhaps it was because of this little favor that when Leon gave an order and instructed the Antolian army to begin to gather towards the Southwest Highlands, the civilians who volunteered to help the Antolian army transport food and grass still surrounded the gate of the military camp. If it were in other noble territories, such a phenomenon would be a spectacle. But in Antolia, it was normal. Because during the war in Antolia, becoming a civilian who participated in the transportation of food and grass in the rear could also get a certain subsidy. Although it was only a little bit compared to the soldiers' military pay, it was good to have food every day, and more importantly, it could also get spiritual satisfaction, so naturally there were many people who responded. And with the appearance of the Elkos and the arrival of a new batch of civilians and craftsmen, the road paving work, which was originally slow due to dense forests and terrain differences, finally made expected progress. After giving his final instructions to Aaron and Todd before leaving, Leon finally set out on his journey to the Principality of Norton, surrounded by his generals. The Antolian army is undoubtedly the absolute main force in this expedition. At first, Leon did not intend to bring his large number of vassals, and it was not certain that anyone would be interested in crossing mountains and ridges to march into Norton. But the Earl of Greywater Castle, Eli Wayne, and several other nobles were eager to show their infinite loyalty to Leon's father, and Leon did need to bring some people to serve as a filling-in division. So, although Leon has made it clear that his vassals do not need to send troops for this expedition, but in addition to the 3 main legions of Anatolia, the Earl of Greywater Castle, Eli Wayne, temporarily gathered 600 peasant soldiers from his territory, and the Viscount of Ram City, Justin Surrey, gathered 1,000 conscripts, plus the scattered tributes and goodwill of the other nobles, barely gathered a team of more than 2,000 people. Of course, loyalty cannot be judged by the number of people sent. For example, the Count of Greywater Castle, Eli Wayne, had already completely contracted the defense of the territory of Greywater Castle to the Ximena family and the Antolian mercenaries. This time, he was able to gather 600 people, which can be said to be a complete exhaustion of fish in his own territory. And Leon would naturally remember the intention of the Count of Greywater Castle. Although it has been considered that the territory directly governed by the Ximena family cannot be sealed off, there will definitely be economic and other care and compensation. I'm sorry to trouble you for this expedition. Because the previous series of actions of the remnant of the restoration of the country were not even human-like, Leon specially brought his teacher, the great wizard Albert, as a support for this expedition. This war is not a civil war in the kingdom with unspoken rules as constraints. In addition to the conventional combat power of the Antolian army, it is always necessary to bring some high-end combat power to be safe. After all, although a powerful person of the Grand Mage level may not really play a big role in a large-scale battlefield, it is an important deterrent force after all. And with Albert by his side, Leon's security level can at least be improved by several levels. Although the Grand Mage may not necessarily win a war, as an important deterrent force, at least there will be no total defeat. It's okay if the Marquis can remember his previous promise. Albert reminded at the right time. Obviously, the big pie that Leon had drawn for Albert before did work extraordinary. Don't worry, teacher. Leon nodded helplessly. When the shadow monster trap mentioned earlier is built, I will immediately arrange for people to start the design and construction of the Anatolia Higher School of Magic. By then, you will definitely be the unique dean. Hearing Leon's solemn promise, Albert nodded with satisfaction. It's just that, although Antolia's financial situation is slightly tight due to the development of the abandoned land, Leon is talking about design. From design to construction, and then taking Albert's opinions into consideration to make some repairs, it would take at least 1 or 2 years, right? Then from construction to completion. Leon felt that if Albert could see the prototype of the Anatolia Higher School of Magic in the second half of his life, it would be a very lucky thing. In addition to several wizards including the Archmage Albert, Leon also brought Elm Ranson as his deputy on this expedition. He was the Anatolia veteran who led the Anatolia caravan to cross the Chillon River 3 times. As the only old comrade among the many generals of Anatolia who had come to the Principality of Norton, Elm's advice was particularly important to Leon. Although the Anatolia caravan had previously been mainly active in the central and northern parts of the Principality of Norton, since the original purpose of the caravan was to trade, Elm had done a lot of homework on the overall situation of the Principality of Norton. Since the Principality of Norton borders the Kingdom of Walrus to the north and the Chillon River in the center often floods, the population of the Principality of Norton is mainly concentrated in the east, west and south. Among them, because the relations with the 2 neighboring countries of the Kingdom of Idrit and the Kingdom of Andal have always been good, the economies of the east and west are relatively developed, and trade exchanges are relatively frequent. As for the south, the Chillon River in the north and the Meyerson River in the south are the 2 main rivers running through the east and west of the Principality of Norton. The south of the Principality of Norton has been nourished by the Meyerson River over the years, so the southern territory has always been an important granary of the Principality of Norton. Since the Marquis has decided to send troops to the Principality of Norton this time, the south bank of the Meyerson River must be taken. Elm pointed seriously at the mark on the map and proposed to Leon. Of course. Leon nodded as a matter of course. The Ximena family has never been greedy. If we can occupy the land south of the Meyerson River, the purpose of this expedition will be accomplished. You know, in this era, the nobles have not yet cast their eyes on the endless ocean. So although there are deep water ports such as Eiderport in the south of the Principality of Norton, Growing food is the top priority in everyone's eyes. The main purpose of the port is nothing more than catching some wandering marine fish in the offshore and shallow sea areas, which is at most a trivial sideline. As for ocean commerce, even though maritime trade has existed for a long time, due to the shipbuilding technology of this era, at least for the Principality of Norton, the Kingdom of Idrid can be said to be the only maritime trade object that the merchant ships of the Principality of Norton can reach. However, the Kingdom of Idrid originally borders the Principality of Norton by land, so in most cases, land trade is more convenient. It is precisely because of the above reasons that although Idrid port is a deep water port, trade is not prosperous. Leon's purpose of this expedition is also very clear. He will first extend the rule of the Ximena family to the coast of the northern continent, so that Antolia will have more opportunities in the future. Grand Duke Norton divided the south bank of the Meyerson River into two regions, namely Wright County with Idrid Port as its capital and Edward Hills with Navarre City as its capital. Let's not talk about the other cities for now. Navarre City is the hereditary fief of the Duke of Navarre. It has a large population and abundant food. It is right on the road to Antolia's westward advance. At least before the civil strife in the Principality of Norton broke out, its military strength was no less than that of the former Duke of Galicia. What about now? Leon keenly captured the key to Elm's words. Hearing this, Elm couldn't help but smile bitterly. Marcus, you also know that during this period of time, although the army of the Kingdom of Walrus temporarily stayed in the north of the Principality of Norton, the remnants of the restoration of the country were raging in the south of the Principality. So what is the current situation in Navarre City? I really don't know. However, when the nobles' rebellion broke out in the Principality of Norton, the Duke of Navarre was also one of the nobles who led the army to the north. Even if the army was not completely wiped out in this war, its strength must have suffered a heavy blow. This is the first good news Leon has heard since he sent troops. I plan to attack Navarre City at night. Looking at the heroic and high-spirited Antolian army all the way, Leon finally told his plan this time. The people of this era generally have a more obvious impact on their night vision due to the lack of some necessary nutrients. But in Antolia, under the influence of the black soil, at least the quality of the Antolian army's diet is guaranteed. I have no objection to the Marquis's consideration. After thinking for a moment, Elm said immediately. Although Leon had issued war bonds with great fanfare before sending troops, so that almost every noble in the south of the kingdom already knew that Leon was going to send troops to the Principality of Norton. But the speed of information transmission in this era is too slow after all. So even if another half a month passed, the southern part of the Principality of Norton might not know the plan of the Antolians to send troops. And even if they knew, who would have thought that the Antolian army, under the leadership of Leon, could pass through the southwest highlands that no one had ever passed before and directly attack the south of the Principality of Norton? So an attack, especially a night attack, it is definitely the best choice. You should tell them in advance that after passing through this mountain forest, the Antolian army must advance at full speed. At that time, the Lapric Legion and the Antolian militia will press forward on all fronts, and we must fight to determine the outcome. Only by taking a strong city in the south of the Principality of Norton as a foothold can the Antolians take the initiative in this battle. The elven longbowmen must also be on standby at all times. They may not be used in this night attack, but they must all be on standby in case of emergency. I will go and pass the order now. Elm nodded seriously. Perhaps it was because this mountain range on the edge of the southwest highlands blocked most of the water vapor from the ocean. When the Antolian army entered the territory of the Principality of Norton, the surrounding humidity was obviously much higher than that of Antolia. The slightly cold mountain breeze weakened a little under the shade of the trees, so that when it brushed across Clemente's wrinkled face, only a soft coolness remained. As an elder of the Moon Elves and the leader of this elven longbow army, Clemente's inner fluctuations were actually a little complicated. Even though he was already 144 years old, in the years he lived in the abandoned land, Clemente had never felt such a natural, cool, sharp, and refreshing mountain breeze. He clearly remembered the enthusiasm of the Antolian civilians when the troops were dispatched. With the order of the young noble, the whole of Antolia seemed to have pressed the fast-forward button. The people living in that land rushed to transport food and grass for the Antolian army and to open up roads for the Antolian soldiers. And this also made him feel a little fortunate. Fortunately, the Moon Elves can now be regarded as friends of the Ximena family. Fortunately, The target of the Antolians' military this time is the Principality of Norton in the west, not the Moon Elves living in the abandoned land. The friendship between the Antolians and the Moon Elves will be indestructible. After seeing the unity of Antolia and the bravery of the Antolia army, Clemente became more determined to have a good relationship with his Ximena family. In this case, the elf longbowman must show the strength of the elves on the land of the Principality of Norton. Especially after a few days of running around, Antolia Marcus León Ximena officially issued an order to prepare for a night attack. Thanks to the Buck Friends Nervebing and 54 Killing Super God for providing military funding for this expedition. Loyal Ministers. Chapter 194, Advent Faction, Night Raid and Harpy. That night, in the south of the Principality of Norton, Navarre City. As the hereditary fief of the Duke of Navarre family, Navarre City, adjacent to the Meyerson River, can be regarded as the largest and most populous quasi-giant city in the south of the Principality of Norton. The reason why it is called a quasi-giant city rather than a giant city is mainly because according to the understanding of the size of cities in this era, if the number of people living in a city exceeds 200,000, it is enough to be called a giant city. For example, Essex, the capital of the Kingdom of Andal, or Bolton, the capital of the Principality of Norton, can be called a real giant city. The total population living in Navarre City is around 150,000. If the people and serfs living in the villages, towns and manors outside the city are added, the total population of Navarre City and its surrounding areas has already exceeded the 200,000 mark, and even approached 300,000. Naturally, it can be called a quasi-giant city. The rushing water of the Meyerson River gave birth to this fertile land in the south of the Principality of Norton. As one of the most important granaries of the Principality of Norton, the Duke of Navarre became one of the few nobles in the Principality of Norton by virtue of its unique natural conditions and geographical location far away from the war. However, the city had already changed its owner long before the Antolian army crossed the southwest highlands. As early as the time of the Noble Rebellion, the Duke of Navarre took away more than two-thirds of the military forces in the territory, and the chaos in the Principality of Norton left the noble private army led by the Duke of Navarre with only a few hundred people when they returned to Navarre City. Therefore, at this moment, the one who controls the city is no longer the Duke of Navarre, a Norton noble, but Cardinal desolate, a devout believer of the remnant of the Restoration. Compared with the Kingdom of Andal, the Kingdom of Idrit and the Principality of Norton have always been areas where the remnants of the Restoration have been more active. Desolate naturally seized this opportunity, summoned many believers, and took down this southern town that originally belonged to the Norton nobles. So when night fell, the Antolian army, which had been running for several days, was preparing for a night attack. The soldiers guarding the city wall were no longer the nobles of the Principality of Norton, but the believers of the Restoration relics wearing brass harpy masks. Hey! The believers patrolling on the city wall made a voice package commonly used by villains. This is the first time I find that the night sky of the Principality of Norton is so beautiful. That's right. For the believers of the Restoration relics who usually hide in the dark corners, the opportunity to walk on the city wall openly is rare. It's not that they don't want to mingle among ordinary people, but mainly for the believers of the Restoration relics of the Advent sect, it is quite difficult to mingle among the crowd. You know, the Restoration relics are also divided into factions. For example, the majority of the followers of the Restoration relics rooted in the Principality of Norton are Adventists. Of course, this Advent is not the same as that Advent. The Adventists among the relics of the Restoration believe that through cruel blood sacrifice rituals, they can gain the favor of the gods they believe in and be granted eternal life. The harpy on their brass mask is one of the gods worshipped by the Adventists of the Restoration relics. It is said that they can obtain immortality by sucking human blood. As the followers of the Adventists of the Restoration relics, perhaps because they have performed too many blood sacrifice rituals on weekdays, most of them are not in a normal mental state. In layman's terms, they have the face of a murderer and it is difficult not to attract attention. That is to say, they now occupy the city of Navarre, so they have the opportunity to walk on the city wall openly. However, for the Antolian army, it doesn't matter what they believe in, and it doesn't matter who controls the city of Navarre. Anyway, it will eventually be controlled by the Antolians. What's more, the city of Navarre is now occupied by the remnants of the Restoration, which saves Leon the step of killing the Duke of Navarre's family and then blaming the remnants of the Restoration after occupying the city. while the believers on the city wall were sighing at the vastness of the night sky and the brilliance of the stars. The Antolian mercenaries carrying a series of climbing tools such as grappling hooks have already touched the base of the Navarre city wall under the cover of night. Among the three main legions of Anatolia, Leon's requirements for Antolian mercenaries are undoubtedly the highest. Although most of the Antolian soldiers today have seen blood and have stepped onto the battlefield during the civil war in the kingdom, in terms of battlefield experience, the Antolian mercenaries are undoubtedly the most experienced. Therefore, the Antolian mercenaries led by Stein himself in this night attack naturally became the first batch of siege troops selected by Leon. Stein looked around. The soldiers standing close to the edge of the city wall were already eager to try. Go. As Stein made the agreed-upon combat gestures in front of the soldiers took out the grappling hooks that had been prepared, swung them several times, and threw them high towards the wall. With a pull, the sharp grappling hooks were embedded in the gaps on the inside of the battlements. At the same time, before the mercenaries were ready to climb the wall, the elven longbowmen, who had already drawn their bows and arrows, released arrows one after another, ruthlessly harvesting the lives of the defenders on the wall under the dark night. If the night vision of the Antorians can reach the level of LV3, then the night vision of the elves is enough to reach the level of LV5. This is not because the elves are born like this, but because the abandoned land is full of black fog. Even if there is an eternal fire to illuminate the way ahead, the elves have long been accustomed to walking in the dark under a hazy situation. This is all practiced. Puff. As the first wave of arrows shot by the elves penetrated the dark night, the excited words of the believer who was still talking nonsense on the city wall almost stopped. He lowered his head in disbelief, and saw a sharp arrow had been deeply embedded in his chest. In just a flash, the intense pain filled his mind, and deep red blood gushed out from the wound. Enemy, enemy. He tried hard to shout, but still fell heavily on the city wall. The believers who were still chatting with him were almost all stunned at this moment. It was not until one by one of the Antolian soldiers jumped onto the city wall with sharp grappling hooks and strong ropes that they woke up from their dreams and suddenly realized what had happened. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The sharp sound of the horn crossed the night sky, once again bringing the dark clouds of war to this city that had long been in silence and sleep. But Leon didn't think that he could easily take down the city with only the Antolian mercenaries. So, after clearing out the few believers who were patrolling, the mercenaries who climbed up the city wall rushed to the gate of Navarre without hesitation. So, a moment later, the city gate opened. All troops attack. After finally hearing this pleasant command, the Antolian militia and Lapric warriors who had been ready for battle almost immediately cheered up, wearing a full set of close-fitting armor, and rushed towards the nearby Navarre city. Covering the whole body with iron armor is obviously unrealistic. Even though the iron smelting factory in Anatolia has made considerable progress in breakthroughs in iron smelting technology, it is still impossible to equip all Antolian soldiers. What's more, heavy iron armor will greatly limit the speed of the soldier's charge. It is not suitable for all situations, nor for all military branches. For example, if the elf longbowman, who is in the back row of the output position, also wears a full set of iron armor, it is not a luxury, but a disease. So, Leon specially prepared full-body soft armor for the Antolian soldiers. Although this light armor made of leather and thin iron sheets is slightly better in terms of defense, it is at least several levels lighter in weight, so people won't be out of breath after running a few steps. At the same time, the remnants of the restoration in the city were finally awakened by the sharp sound of the horn. One by one, the remnants of the restoration, holding sticks and swords, and wearing brass harpy masks, poured out of the houses on both sides of the street, staring at each other in astonishment, and listening to the shouts of killing coming from the city gate. After all, the remnants of the restoration were not regular soldiers. Previously, he was able to defeat the conscripted soldiers in the hands of the Duke of Navarre because of his belief buff. Now, facing the Antolian army, which is obviously many times stronger than the ordinary noble private army, it's like a gold player mistakenly entering a bronze game, and Liao stealing the White Tiger Hall, which eventually caused the excellent matching mechanism of the Norton region to temporarily fail. For the Harpy. For the remnants of the restoration of the country. Even though many bishops of the remnants of the restoration of the country are still in the city and have realized the coming of danger, calling on their believers to take up their weapons to resist the incoming enemies, but the process may be tortuous, but the ending is already doomed. Who would have thought that the city of Navarre, located in the south of the Principality of Norton, would be attacked by an unknown enemy at night? Even though the Antolian army has already entered the city, in fact, the believers in the city still don't know who they are fighting against and where they are resisting an army from. There was no way. In the minds of the believers, the nobles of the Principality of Norton should have been pinned down on the north bank of the Myrcid River, so their defense focus had always been on the north of the city. Who would have thought that an army would suddenly come from the east? Especially when the city gates were opened and the soldiers of Antolia poured into the city from the city gates. Even if the believers of the Restoration relics had the bonus of faith, even if the harpy masks on their faces prevented them from seeing the terrified expressions of their companions, the brass masks could not hide their terrified eyes after all. An atmosphere of decadence and defeat had already begun to spread among the believers of the Restoration relics. Moreover, the Lapric warriors who arrived later almost all had a crossbow in their hands. This kind of continuous firing weapon with a short effective range was invincible in the narrow streets of Navarre, so that the defenders in the city could not organize a few decent lines of defense. Even just a few Lapric warriors armed with crossbows can control a fork in the road. Kill. Compared to the confusion and helplessness of the defenders in the city, the soldiers of Antolia are getting more and more energetic. After all, at the beginning of the night attack, when Leon could not see the flag of the Duke of Navarre flying on the city wall, he realized who was currently in control of the city. The remnants of the Restoration. Notorious. Although the sturdy Antolians have never experienced the rampage of the remnants of the Restoration, they have heard about the inhuman behavior of these guys from the refugees who moved to Antolia. This means that Leon's expedition is definitely a just war, and the Antolian army is a resounding army of justice. What's more, when Leon attacked the city, he did not intend to leave all the believers of the Restoration remnants in the city at once in this night attack. Therefore, there was a way to escape from the battlefield behind the defenders, which further destroyed the fighting spirit of these believers who dare not show their true faces. Damn it! When Cardinal de Coaltis woke up from his sleep, the city of Navarre was already filled with the shouts of the Antolians. My Lord Bishop. Retreat. Without the reminder of the believers around him, Deco could realize that Navarre would definitely not be able to defend it. Because no one knew the strength of the believers under his command better than him, he even considered the feasibility of running away at the first time. But the problem is, the conclusion he came to was very clear, that is, he must not run away. The dungeons in the city also held a large number of baits he had captured in these days. If Navarre fell, the benefits of the remnants of the restoration of the country from the previous capture of Navarre would be greatly reduced, and even whether he could survive was probably an unknown. After all, the believers in Eiderport are still waiting for him to transport enough bait. Thinking of this, Deco's thoughts became more and more irritable. He ignored the believers who were persuading him, but quickly took out a large piece of shriveled bark from the cracks on the bottom of the bookshelf, and then put it into his mouth to chew it carefully. In an instant, he seemed to see the shadow of the harpy in his vision, and even his whole mind seemed to become much clearer. And most importantly, at this moment, the cardinal felt full of power. He grabbed the spear in the hands of the believers behind him and strode onto the street outside the door. The people of the harpy, this city will belong to. Before he finished speaking, an arrow flashing with cold light pierced his throat in an instant. For a moment, blood splashed. On the city wall not far away, the elf elder Clemente took a deep breath and slowly put down the bow and arrow in his hand. Chapter 195. Leon had to change tactics. Which is faster, the arrow or the spell? This is a question. Standing next to Clemente, Leon saw with his own eyes how the elf elder shot the enemy with one arrow, and naturally, he had such a question in his mind. A powerful mage can release a magic shield as a barrier around him as soon as he senses danger. However, it only took a split second for Clemente to shoot the arrow and for the cardinal to be shot in the throat. Considering that he couldn't let Clemente shoot an arrow at him to verify the answer to this question, Leon felt that he needed to improve his security measures. He is a man who cherishes his life. Otherwise, if he dies before his business is halfway done, wouldn't he become the most miserable time traveler in history? Therefore, this expedition to the Principality of Norton was not just a field investigation of the human military strength by the elves, but also a way for the Antorians or Leon, the Lord, to see the big picture from the small, and to judge the overall strength of the elves by observing the actual combat power of the elf longbowmen. Obviously, perhaps in terms of overall strength, The Moon Elves may be inferior to Antoria, but at least in terms of long-range strike capability, the elf longbowmen have a very obvious advantage. This means that the Antorians need to have enough long-range defense means. Even though the relationship between Antorians and elves is friendly and the favorability is positive now, even the close relationship between human nobles may change or even end up in hostility due to interests, and this is even more true between humans and elves, two completely different races. Long-range defense must be done. Magic engineering must also be developed as soon as possible. At the moment when Clemente shot the cardinal in the throat, Leon finally made up his mind. If it is difficult to resist long-range attacks like the Moon Elves through ordinary means, then we have to use magic, perhaps. Although the Antolian higher school of magic may be extremely expensive, now that I think about it carefully, it really shouldn't be delayed. If it doesn't work, just build a few buildings to make do. However, now is obviously not the time to think about these things. Thinking of this, Leon simply gathered his mind and looked back at the city shrouded in the night, observing the battle in the city. The death of Cardinal Deco Altus can be said to have outlined a predetermined ending for this night's attack, and wrote the fate of defeat for the remaining believers of the restoration of the country who have not yet left the city. The stars in the night sky flickered with hazy light and shadow, and the shouting and killing in the city became sparser. Leon stood on the city wall, his eyes seemed to be able to see through the dark night, accompanied by the torches held high in the hands of the Antolian soldiers, sweeping across the vast city in front of him. The appearance of Navarra City is no different from most cities of this era. Narrow and crowded streets, houses lined up one after another. The streets of the whole city are filled with the smell of sewage, which is very common in this era. In the land of Antolia, Leon has not felt this smell for a long time, so much so that he actually felt a kind of inexplicable peace of mind. Leon quickly cleared out this strange thought in his mind. But, looking at the city shrouded in the night, Leon always felt an indescribable sense of weirdness, as if something was wrong. The cardinal is dead. While Leon was observing the battle situation, it was not known whether the Antolia soldiers shouted first, or the believers of the restoration of the country finally found the body lying dead in the middle of the road. The cry of the cardinal's death finally spread in the city. Even those believers who were still resisting stubbornly finally lost their temper after hearing this sentence. Soon. There was no need to wait for the Antolian mages to make a move. Stein and Andrew arrived together. Marcus. The two said in unison. Has Navarra been taken? Leon said calmly. Yes. Hearing this, Andrew replied in a deep voice, Antolian troops have controlled the gates and walls of Navarra City on all four sides. Most of the remnants of the restoration who had resisted army have surrendered, and a few have seen that they are doomed to fail and simply committed suicide to follow their so-called gods. Tell the soldiers to be careful. Although most of the remnants of the restoration are a bunch of lunatics, there are also some smart guys among them. Who knows, there may be someone hiding in the houses in the city. Yes. Andrew nodded in response. But, Marcus, there are some things that you'd better go and see in person. Where is it? The dungeon under the Navarra castle. At this point, Andrew's face couldn't help but become a little ugly. Let's go together. Leon glanced at the mages behind him and said. It's not that he is timid. After all, Leon himself is a real mage, and his own strength is there. But the problem is that this city has been controlled by the believers of the remnants of the restoration of the country. For these religious lunatics who yearn for eternal life, Leon thinks it is better to be careful. The Lord's Castle of the Duke of Navarre is located at the end of the central street, which is particularly conspicuous among the low houses. Is this the cardinal? The body of Deco Altus was lying on the road leading to the Lord's Castle, and was now surrounded by the soldiers of Antolia. That's him. Andrew nodded. Before the Antolian army liberated this city, he was the actual controller of this city. Liberated. Leon was stunned for a moment, then laughed. That word is well used. Andrew scratched his head in confusion. The literacy class that the Marcus specially opened for the officers is not in vain. At this time, Leon had already leaned down and stared at the mask worn on the cardinal's face. As a believer of the Advent sect among the remnants of the Restoration, the Mask of the Harpy can be regarded as a must-have for every believer. On the brass mask, I don't know which half-baked craftsman barely carved out an extremely cruel image with extremely abstract lines. Sharp and slender eagle claws, wide and complex wings, and a hideous face like a monster with two fangs. I can tell it's an eagle, but what about a banshee? Just because her hair is a little longer. Looking at the brass mask on the cardinal's face, Leon asked curiously. Maybe, the cognition of the remnant believers of the restoration is a little more abstract. It should be. Leon nodded, and then waved his hand, signaling the guards behind him to step forward and remove the brass mask. Then, an old face with a sallow complexion, shriveled, thin, covered with acne, and skin ulcers appeared in front of everyone. Even the calm Antolian warrior couldn't help but take a breath of elk goose at this moment. No wonder he has to wear a mask. Regardless of whether his appearance is human enough, the bumps on his face alone are abstract enough. Mr. Marcus. Andrew handed over a piece of bark that looked a little dry and hard. This cardinal was chewing this thing when he rushed to the street. According to the information we got before, chewing this thing seems to be able to see the projection of the harpy and gain power from the gods. This speech made Leon silent. Based on previous observations and the descriptions of everyone, as a time traveler, he already roughly understood what this thing was used for. Noticed to the entire Antolian army that all barks of this type seized in the city must be turned in. Those who keep them privately will be punished by military law. Anyone who possesses this will be regarded as a believer in the restoration of the country. Andrew did not expect that his lord's order would be so straightforward and his reaction would be so intense, but he immediately replied, "I understand. Let's go. I want to see what else is in the Lord's castle of the Duke of Navarre." Tapestries with exquisite patterns hang above the walls, and portraits of the ancestors of the Duke of Navarre's family are still preserved in the frames made of precious wood. When the Antolian soldiers pushed open the heavy door of the Lord's castle, Leon seemed to be able to feel the heavy history of the Navarre family. In fact, the history of the Navarre family is much longer than that of the Duchy of Norton. Before the establishment of the Duchy of Norton, the Navarre family, located on the south bank of the Miersen River, was already the supreme ruler of this land, and its family history can even be traced back to the Holy Brun Empire. The wood used for the chairs in the castle is all white sandalwood from the Edward Hills area, which is one of the most precious woods in the Principality of Norton. The floor of the corridor is covered with a layer of crimson carpet, and the corners of the carpet are even hand-woven embroidery. Not far away, at the entrance of the stairs leading to the castle dungeon, the soldiers of Antolia were lined up with serious faces, and their appearance of being ready for battle made people think that there seemed to be some great terror imprisoned in the dungeon. Leon frowned and walked down the stairs slowly. The old wooden stairs made a creaking sound from time to time, which was particularly loud in the silent environment. Just after walking down the stairs for a few steps, the heavy historical atmosphere in the castle disappeared, replaced by a repressive and cold atmosphere. It's not that Leon didn't want to go down, but the dungeon, even the passage of the dungeon, was full of people with their hands and feet tied up. When they saw someone coming, they all struggled violently. The mouth stuffed with cloth could still hear bursts of sobbing. Leon's eyes roughly swept over it, and he felt that the ships that transported slaves during the triangular trade period were probably no more than this. Even worse than this. After all, the dungeon was packed with people, and it was difficult for the civilians imprisoned in the dungeon to even sit down. According to the information obtained from the previous interrogation, almost all the people in Navarre City, except those who escaped, were imprisoned. And except for the 3 prisons in Navarre City, most of the people were imprisoned in the manors and castles around Navarre City. Andrew's voice trembled slightly. Such behavior was too horrifying. What are the remnants of the restoration of the nation doing? Although Leon had learned in the previous interrogation that the remnants of the restoration of the nation, a group of religious lunatics who yearned for immortality, jumped out during the civil strife in Norton in order to catch enough bait. But hearing is one thing, and seeing it with your own eyes is another. According to the news we just received, the bait captured by the remnants of the restoration of the nation on this land will eventually be sent to the port of Eider. Port of Eider. Hearing this, Leon could not help but be stunned. Yes, I guess they may want to transport these people living in the south of the Principality of Norton to other places by sea. Let's release them first. After a moment of silence, Leon said, I don't know how long these people have been detained here. Pass the order to implement military control in Navarre City and let all soldiers be alert. Open the granary in the city and prepare a little porch for each of them. Leon's original plan to attack the port of Eider was definitely not feasible now. It's not that the Antolian army can't do it, but, just as Andrew mentioned before, the believers of the remnants of the restoration of the nation kept most of the ordinary people living in this land in prisons and manors. Compared with the blitzkrieg of Eiderport, rescuing these imprisoned people is the first priority of the Anatolian army. Otherwise, if there is not enough population, what is the point of the Anatolians occupying this land? Farming requires population, and the prosperity of the city requires population. Even though the land on the south bank of the Myrsin River is extremely fertile, food cannot grow out of thin air on this land. Moreover, the Cardinal of Navarre city is dead, and the plan to transfer the population to Eiderport is naturally affected. Leon dare not gamble on what the remaining believers of the Restoration who are guarding the people can do. Andrew. 1. Since Navarre has been conquered, this land is the territory of the Ximena family, and the people here are the subjects of the Ximena family. You each lead your own legion, and bring 100 elven longbowmen and 2 accompanying mages to clean up all the manors in the surrounding areas of Navarre. You know, except for the Antillean mercenaries and Steinshans, which are still only a few hundred people, after this period of development, the number of soldiers in the 2 main legions commanded by Andrew and Juan has already exceeded the 1,000 mark. It is natural to clean up the remnants of the restoration of the country entrenched in the surrounding manors and towns. Some book friends said not to use the words Iksha in the article before, saying that it is too Chinese, and asked me to use idioms as little as possible, so here I will collect the opinions of book friends. I always think that fantasy is just a background, and the specific name is purely a translation problem. Is it really out of the play? What do you think is the right name? Chapter 196, Clan really wants to improve. Subscribe. 2 in 1. It was just dawn. There was still some morning mist outside the city. The rising sun shone through the thin clouds, casting wisps of mottled morning light on this slightly dilapidated city, as if dispelling the haze brought to the city by the remnants of the Restoration, and illuminating the flag floating on the city wall. This was the double-headed eagle flag of Anatolia, flying over the territory of the Principality of Norton for the first time. For the city of Navarre, this was undoubtedly a brand new day. The potholes in the city still had a pungent stench of feces, and the houses in the city were still dilapidated and messy. Antolia's soldiers were traveling back and forth deep in the streets, collecting the bodies of the remnants of the Restoration believers, intending to burn them clean at noon to avoid delaying too long and causing plague and disease. As for the brass masks they wore, Leon had already ordered people to collect them, and planned to send them to the capital in stages and batches after the war was over, in order to prove the reality that the southern part of the Principality of Norton had long been deeply poisoned by the remnants of the Restoration. At the same time, under the supervision of the soldiers, ragged civilians also walked out of the dungeon one after another. Although the morning sun was not dazzling, the long darkness in the dungeon made them look a little helpless when they were bathed in the sun again. In addition, most of the civilians imprisoned in the prison were tied up with ropes, so many people still walked in a trembling manner. When they saw the soldiers holding weapons around them, most of these civilians showed a very obvious panic and fear in their eyes. Even when they just stepped out of the dungeon, some people pretended to run, but they only stumbled a few steps and fell to the ground. After staying in the dungeon for so long in hunger and cold, these people had already lost their strength. This dungeon alone has at least 3,000 people imprisoned. Nearly 100 of them have died in the prison due to hunger and cold. If the Anatolian army had not arrived in time before they were on the verge of collapse, I'm afraid it would be a question whether half of these people could survive. Add to that the people imprisoned in some houses and other prisons, there are probably about 10,000 to 20,000 people. Stan walked slowly to Leon's side, and there was a hint of hesitation in his voice. He couldn't help but complain, it seems that the Duke of Navarre is not a good guy, otherwise who would build such a big dungeon? Have you distributed the porridge? Leon was silent for a moment, and changed the subject in a dull manner. It was just distributing porridge, not because Leon was stingy. As the largest noble in the southern part of the Principality of Norton, the Duke of Navarre had enough food stored in the granary in the city to make people marvel. The main reason was that most of these people had been starving for a long time in the prison. If they were suddenly overfed, their already weak physical condition might become even more serious. I have already told someone to do it. After that, Stein immediately added, Andrew and Juan have also led their troops out of the city. According to the map found in the castle of the Duke of Navarre, they will conduct targeted cleanup of the surrounding towns and manors. Leon nodded, indicating that he already knew. Strictly speaking, the current Navarre city can be regarded as the territory of the Ximena family. The people in front of them are naturally the people of the Ximena family. If the remnants of the Restoration dare to do this on this land, they have already found a way to die. These people are the most precious population under León. The maintenance of order and the distribution of porridge will be left to the conscripts provided by the other nobles, so that the mercenaries of Anatolia can have a good rest first. After all, I am afraid that Eiderport will be a fierce battle later. León said in a deep voice. Even if the news that Navarre city has been captured by the Anatolian army may not reach Eiderport in the next 3 or 2 days. However, León still needed to comfort the people who had just been rescued, and the Anatolian army still needed to carry out targeted cleanup of the surrounding areas of Navarre. Therefore, when León led his army to Eiderport, the remnants of the Restoration who were entrenched there must have received the news. This also gave León a premonition. If you want to capture Eiderport, which is adjacent to the coast, it will probably not be as smooth as the night attack on Navarre city. There were gradually some noises on the street. After the initial panic, the people who were previously imprisoned in prison finally realized that the city now had a new owner. The remnants of the Restoration wearing a brass-colored hideous mask disappeared, replaced by a group of soldiers wearing soft armor that they had never seen before. Although in the eyes of the ignorant people, most of the nobles' private armies are also a group of villains. But somehow, these soldiers in front of them always seem to give people an unusual feeling. Perhaps. Is this because he was just released from prison by these soldiers? However, Halclan did not think so. At this time, he was squatting under the wall on one side of the street, holding a wooden bowl with the porridge he had just received, and his eyes occasionally glanced at the street not far away. In front of him, the subjects captured from Navarre city by the remnants of the Restoration of the country were queuing up in a long line under the supervision of the Anatolian soldiers, receiving the food given by the new conqueror of the city, the Marquis of Antolian León Ximena. This is not something that an ordinary noble lord can do. Halclan was very sure of this. Because his ancestors had been rich and even served as honorary nobles of the Principality of Norton, at least that was what Clan's deceased father had always said. However, honorary nobles and hereditary nobles are different after all. Since there was no fiefdom that could be passed down from generation to generation, by the time of Clan's generation, he was just an ordinary freeman. Fortunately, with the savings left by his father, Clan opened a tavern of considerable size in Navarre city, and made many friends, so he could make a living. Compared with most people of this era, it was already quite good. However, the civil war in the Principality of Norton broke Clan's originally peaceful life. In fact, he didn't think that this sudden civil war in the Principality would bring much change to his life. Isn't it just a civil war? Fight a few battles and replace a few nobles. Maybe it will only take a few months for this civil war to naturally subside. Anyway, the city of Navarre is located in the south of the Principality of Norton. In all these years, it has never really become a battlefield. At most, the nobles will impose some taxes on him, but no matter how difficult it is always better than losing your life on the battlefield. But what Clan, or all the nobles and civilians did not expect was that a civil war that would have been quelled soon gradually became a prairie fire with the invasion of the Kingdom of Walrus and the landing of the remnants of the Restoration. Even the city of Navarre, located in the south of the kingdom, was captured by the believers of the remnants of the Restoration. Then, including Clan, the people living in this city, all became prisoners in the hands of the remnants of the Restoration. Some people were imprisoned in the manor outside the city, and others were imprisoned in the dungeon of the Lord's castle. The dungeon without sunlight, the prisoners were starving and cold. During the time they were imprisoned in the dungeon, no one cared about their life or death, and no one cared about their mental state. Every few days, the believers wearing brass masks would take away a group of people imprisoned in the prison, and then send in another group. Clan did not know where those people were sent. But the ending would definitely not be very happy. But he had no mind to consider the fate of others, because the dungeon under the castle was not only cold and depressing, but even the most basic 2 meals a day could not be guaranteed. Because the prison was too crowded, the believers in charge of guarding the captives had always just thrown a basket of black bread at the entrance of the dungeon, regardless of whether it was enough to share or whether anyone would die from lack of food or water. Clan didn't know how long this kind of day lasted. He just felt that he was imprisoned in the dungeon, just like a walking corpse, and he would die there sooner or later. Until last night, the Anatolian army captured the city controlled by the remnants of the believers of the Restoration of the country, and took the captives including Clan out of the prison, allowing them to see the warm sun in the sky again. Marquis of Anatolia. Although the clan family had long been reduced from a small noble to a civilian, he knew much more than ordinary people in this era. So he was very sure that the title of Marquis of Antolia did not belong to any noble in the Principality of Norton. And looking at the faces of these soldiers, they are obviously not the walrus people from the north. So, have the nobles of the Kingdom of Idrid or the Kingdom of Andal also participated in this war? Are there any of you who can read and write? Just as he was thinking, the shouts of the Antolian soldiers broke the whispers on the street, and a team of soldiers in soft armor walked in the middle of the street. Seeing this, the crowd on the street immediately dispersed to both sides of the road, and those who had just received the porridge also hugged the wooden bowls in their hands and lowered their heads. In people's cognition, the nobles of this era are not easy to deal with, and the soldiers under the nobles are the same. If you accidentally block the way of the soldiers, you may get whipped a few times. However, the Antolian soldiers did not have the mind to consider the thoughts of these people. The strict military discipline of the Antolian army and their identity as civilians would not let them embarrass these civilians who had just been rescued from prison by the Antolians. They just used their scrutinizing eyes to scan the civilians around them, waiting for someone to answer. Cland clenched the wooden bowl in his hand, and a hint of hesitation flashed in his eyes. Finally, watching the team of Antolian soldiers gradually go away, Cland simply made up his mind and shouted to the backs of the soldiers, "I can." After all, he is a descendant of a fallen noble. Although for most civilians, learning to read and write is of no use, Cland's parents did not want to be forgotten by the crowd forever, so before Cland's father died, he taught Cland many things that civilians had no chance to learn. And the most basic reading and writing is naturally one of them. Can you read and write? Seeing that someone finally responded to his call, the leading soldier turned around quickly, and a hint of joy appeared on his face. "Yes," Cland said bravely. He didn't want to be an insignificant civilian forever. What's more, the wealth he had accumulated and the tavern he ran all turned to dust the moment the remnants of the Restoration took control of the city. This undoubtedly caused an indelible impact on Cland's heart. How can he protect what belongs to him? That is to prove his ability and gain the favor and protection of a great noble. According to Cland's inference, first of all, the Duke of Navarre is very strong, but the remnants of the Restoration overthrew the Duke of Navarre's rule, and then the Marquis of Antolia drove the remnants of the Restoration out of the city. In summary, if ranked by strength, the Marquis of Antolia is greater than the remnants of the Restoration, and greater than the Duke of Navarre. So, he must seize this opportunity. "What's your name?" "Hal Cland." He quickly replied, "My grandfather was once an honorary baron personally conferred by the Duke of Norton. So I learned to read and write." "In that case, you should know more about Navarre City, right?" When the soldiers of Antolia brought the young man to him, Leon was sitting in the study that originally belonged to the Duke of Navarre. Of course, the flag that originally symbolized the Duke of Navarre has also been replaced with a double-headed eagle of Antolia. "Yes, I used to run a tavern in the city, so I can not only read and write, but also be quite familiar with the situation in Navarre City and its surrounding areas." Looking at the young nobleman in front of him, Cland did not dare to have the slightest neglect. Because before he was brought to this study, he had already heard that the young nobleman in front of him was the only Marquis of the Andal Kingdom, the highest-ranking noble in the southern part of the Andal Kingdom. So, the army from the Andal Kingdom that captured Navarre City turned out to be? Exclamation mark. Cland could not imagine how the Antolians came here. But he was very aware that the decision of the young noble in front of him would change his life. There should be many people who can read and write in Navarre, right? Yes. Cland nodded very seriously, but most of the servants who were originally loyal to the Duke of Navarre were slaughtered when the followers of the Restoration entered the city, so most of the remaining ones are guys like me who are from aristocratic families, and a few free people with relatively good living conditions. 3 days. Leon said calmly, "I will give you 3 days to pull out a team of bureaucrats who can read and write. If you can do it, then you will be their leader. If not, I will replace you with someone else." Even though Leon will have to implement military management in the city before the end of this war, at present, the militia of Antolia and the soldiers of the Lapric Legion are still cleaning up the remnants of the Restoration entrenched around Navarre. So, at least Leon still has a week before leaving for Eiderport, so he can take this opportunity to search for talents in Navarre. 3 days. Hearing this, an endless fighting spirit suddenly emerged in Cland's heart. People of this era are not without dreams, but they have no channels to cross classes and no opportunities to go further. At this moment, the young Marcus has already placed this hard-won opportunity in front of him. He, Clan, really wants to make progress. I will definitely not let you down, my respected Marcus. Clan stared into Leon's eyes and promised very seriously. Please read it again. Oh. How's your rhythm recently? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197. That day, the Antolians learned to fly. When Clan walked out of the Lord's castle, the morning sun shone on his shoulders. At this moment, what appeared before him was still the familiar city, low houses, narrow streets, and people queuing up to receive porridge. But Clan knew very well that from this moment on, everything had changed. At this moment, he only knew one thing in his heart. That is, he finally got the opportunity he had dreamed of. The young noble gave him 3 days. If he, Clan, could do what León ordered within 3 days, then León Ximena, the Marquis of Antolia, would become the thickest thigh he had ever held. That's the Marquis. Although if we only look at the title, Leon's title is not higher than the previous ruler of this city, the Duke of Navarre, but the rule of the Duke of Navarre has long become the history of this land. Leon's attitude was very clear. The arrival of the Antolia army was not just for plunder, but also to bring this land under the rule of the Ximena family forever. Clan saw the spirit of the Antolian army with his own eyes, so Clan believed it without a doubt. And if he could do his job well, he might be valued by the young Marcus and change his future destiny. León didn't know what Clan was thinking, nor did he need to know. The population of Navarre City is large. Although at this moment, most of the population has been imprisoned, it would not be difficult to find some civilians who can read and write, or find a few declining nobles from hundreds of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people. Therefore, the 3 days León mentioned are really just 3 days. If Clan fails to fulfill his promise within 3 days, León will choose someone else to do it. Because although the Ximena family hopes that talents are scarce now, they always have to make sure that the person is a talent before they will recruit and understand. León doesn't care whether the person who works for him is Clan, Dorland, or Darank. As long as he can get things done well, León will naturally give him a chance. The Duke of Navarre has accumulated so much food. Compared to paying attention to a little person who is now insignificant, León is actually more concerned about the benefits of this battle. The population under the rule of the Duke of Navarre is naturally the most valuable resource in León's mind. In addition, this fertile land on the south bank of the Myrsen River has brought León an unexpected surprise. Although the Duke of Navarre certainly does not have a land compactor that can improve the soil, the unique natural advantages of this land have also allowed the Duke of Navarre to accumulate an extremely astonishing amount of money and food. With such an amazing supplement, let alone giving food to the civilians living in Navarre City, the food seized from Navarre City alone may be able to support the needs of the Antolian army in the south of the Principality of Norton. You know, the money and food in the city were probably transported to the port of Eider together with the population. The believers of the remnant of the Restoration have even packed it and loaded it onto trucks, which greatly facilitated the subsequent transportation process of the Antolian soldiers. War still makes money quickly. León couldn't help but sigh. The nobles are really rich. The city of Navarre alone is enough to make León eat a lot of oil. If the port of Eider is taken, let alone other things, all the holes in the previously issued war bonds can be paid off, and there will even be a large surplus, which can be diverted to the construction of new cities in abandoned places. Are all the things I asked you to prepare ready? Reporting to the Marquis, everything has been prepared, just waiting for you to go and see it in person. Hearing this, the artisans accompanying the army hurriedly stood up and said, "You know, this western expedition to Norman, León can be said to be imperative. In addition to the wizards accompanying the army, there are also many artisans accompanying the army. It is early morning now, and the weather conditions are still suitable, so naturally, the hot air balloons made by the Antolian craftsmen can be released for a try. P.S. The hot air balloon is only used temporarily. After all, it is an old routine in farming literature. Everyone is tired of seeing it, and I am tired of writing it, but some things must be transitioned, so I would like to explain it here. As a time traveler, León is very familiar with the hot air balloon. Back then, when he went to Cappadocia for inspection and work, He tried it himself. However, in the previous life, the hot air balloon may have been just an entertainment activity that tourists love to see, but here, in this world, at least for the current Antolian army, it is very important. Neither León nor many generals of Antolian are familiar with the south of the Principality of Norton. If there is such a thing floating in the sky, scouting the enemy situation for the Antolian army every day and overlooking the surrounding situation, it will undoubtedly bring great convenience to the Antolian army's march. At least there is no need to worry about being ambushed or caught off guard. After all, the Idric kingdom had set a precedent. Due to its unfamiliarity with the local conditions, it had a very tragic encounter with the walrus cavalry heading south. Although it was claimed that the soldiers were brave and the generals were courageous, the final result was a victory. Therefore, as the Marquis of Antolia, León naturally had to consider all possible situations. When León finally arrived at the temporary military camp outside the city under the protection of everyone, the craftsmen of Antolia had already lit the fire under the balloon. The fuel used was naturally the nightmare fuel with Antolia's characteristics. It was small in size and easy to store. It was really the best choice for the army to carry. The gas that expanded due to heat made the balloon, which originally looked exhausted and weak, become firm and collided again. If it were not for the rope pulling it, it might have pulled the basket below in the next second and couldn't help but go up to the sky. León raised his head, glanced at the sky, felt a breeze blowing by his side, and felt that there should be no unexpected situation. The biggest disadvantage of hot air balloons is that they have extremely strict requirements for meteorological conditions. Usually, only in the early morning, there are conditions for flying. The two Antolian warriors who were ready for the flight have already sat in the basket under the balloon. León doesn't want to be the first person to fly in Antolian. Since the hot air balloons made by Antolian craftsmen are really simple, even León himself doesn't know what it will be like to fly up. If the wind direction suddenly changes, and the wind force suddenly changes, then where you land depends on luck. However, there must be brave men under a big reward. In the face of a very high amount of compensation, even if the mortality rate is 50%, there are naturally people willing to take risks. If the bottom wants to get to the top, they have to fight for their lives. Otherwise, how can they stand out? For most Antolians, this is the truth they firmly believe in. When I come back, I will personally award you medals. León hugged the heads of the two middle-aged soldiers and promised solemnly, I am willing to serve you. The soldier sitting in the basket had long been ready to die, but after hearing the promise of his lord, he still couldn't help but shed tears. Every Antolian had sincere respect for this young lord. Before León came to power, if they lost the fight, their whole family would have to eat dirt. But now, at least there is a kind Marquis who is willing to treat their family and relatives well. So, since there's a chance, naturally we have to fight hard. Let it fly. León took a few steps back and finally gave the order. As the ropes that bound the hot air balloon were untied, the huge balloon that expanded due to the heat finally began to fly towards the sky. For most people of this era, this is definitely a rare scene. It can even be said that it is the only one in a lifetime. And when the hot air balloon with a double-headed eagle emblem finally floated over the city of Navarre, the people in the city also looked up in astonishment. Cland, who was walking briskly on the street, also looked up at the sky amid the exclamations of the crowd. What caught his eye was a family emblem that was very familiar to him. The Ximena family. After a long while, Cland gathered his mind and walked quickly towards the house not far away. He must not miss this opportunity that he had finally got. Eider port in the south of the Principality of Nordu. The surging waves beat against the reefs on the shore, and the sparkling waves seemed to be mixed with the color of the rising sun. Although it is adjacent to the coast, Eider port is not actually very rich. The sea breeze blowing towards the town is mixed with a unique salty smell of the sea, which brings a completely different atmosphere to this coastal town and a unique experience to the people living in this city. Live by the mountain, live by the mountain, live by the sea, live by the sea. Before León came to power, the Antolians, who were surrounded by mountains, lived by hunting in the mountains and forests, while the people of Eider port lived on the fish caught in the sea. Compared with the vast majority of people in this era who could only dig for food on the fields, the situation of the Eider people was actually much better. Until one day, the remnants of the Restoration came. As the civil strife in the Principality of Norton intensified, the current Eider port has actually become the most important stronghold of the remnants of the Restoration in the south of the Principality of Norton. All the baits caught from the south of the kingdom and even the north bank of the Myrson River will be sent to Eider port, and then shipped from this port adjacent to the coast to the final destination. Therefore, this place also gathers the most important forces of the Adventist Restoration remnants in the south of the Principality of Norton. Now it has been 3 days since the fall of Navarre. As one of the cardinals who controls this town, Darren Altus naturally received the news from the east. All bad news, no good news. The first is the fall of Navarre. The second is that the bait he finally got became someone else's wedding dress. As for the third, according to the information provided by the believers who ran out of Navarre, his brother, Deco Altus, has died in Navarre. Antorians. Since Leon has never concealed his identity, the remnants of the restoration of the country naturally understand who they are going to face. Andal Kingdom noble, Antolian Marcus León Ximena. A young Marcus who was conferred a noble title for his outstanding military exploits. But how did the Antolians get here? If the news from the north of the Principality of Norton is correct, wouldn't the Andal Kingdom's army have been blocked at the border by the Walrus people? However, at this time, he obviously didn't have the mind to consider how the Antolians came to the south of Norton. Eider port must not be lost. When meeting with the other two cardinals, Darren Altus said without hesitation, Eider port is the key to this plan. If we can't defend Eider port, then we can't transport the bait to the sea. Not only me, but everyone will be punished by those adults. Only by dedicating our lives to the Harpy can we redeem the sins we have committed. Isn't it your brother's work? One of the cardinals said unhappily. Fortunately, he's dead. If he is not dead, I will definitely kill him with my own hands. Useless people don't need to live. Of course. Although he was wearing a harpy mask on his face, Darren's expression hidden behind the mask did not change at all because of these words. It seemed that in his eyes, the death of his own brother was just a trivial matter. He just asked calmly, "How much bait do we have now?" Hearing this, the other two cardinals couldn't help but look surprised. The bait cannot be used. These are what the adults of Tsukishima want. But if we don't use them, can Eider port be defended? Seeing this, the cardinal named Darren asked sternly, "There are only more than 1,000 believers in Eider port now. Only by sacrificing the blood of the baits to the great harpy, the projection of the gods, can we win this war. Our opponent is the Marquis of Antolia, the noble who eliminated the Duke of Galicia." Crap, don't forget that the Duke of Galicia is the person you won over. If the Antolians hadn't obtained the wealth of the Bravis family, how could they afford the consumption of this war? So, this matter is ultimately due to your mistake. Hearing this, the cardinal called crap inevitably weakened his momentum. As long as we defeat those Antolians who came from afar, we can get more bait. I'm sure the adults in Tsukishima won't blame us for this. Eider port is the grave of those damned Antolians. Darren clenched his fist and hammered it hard on the table in front of him. At this moment, he had already outlined 100 ways for the young noble to die in his mind. Please read it again. Please read it again. As I said, if the pace is slow, just say it in the latest chapter. It's still a 2-in-1 chapter. There is no more today. Thank you for your support. Chapter 198. Leon is so loyal. In early May, Yi went to war. As the horn sounded, the gate of Navarre was slowly pushed open by the soldiers. The young Marquis of Antolia, León Ximena, rode his warhorse and walked at the front of the team. Behind him, thousands of neatly lined Antolia soldiers, holding sharp weapons and wearing standard soft armor, walked out with the momentum of thousands of troops in the surprised eyes of the people on both sides of the street. Cland naturally stood in the crowd. It must be said that he was very lucky. Cland was lucky to find enough people within 3 days to build a temporary team that could upload and issue Leon's orders, so that Leon's decrees could be heard by every citizen. So now Cland has been appointed by Leon as the chief herald of Navarre City. Although in essence, this is just a job of running errands, it has made Cland feel satisfied. After all, the position of herald is the one closest to the upper nobility, and it is also the position most likely to be promoted and promoted. Outside, the Antolian army is preparing for battle, and inside, Leon has temporarily promoted people in Navarre City to work together to govern. Although the flag of the Ximena family has only been flying on the walls of Navarre City for about a week, the people living on this land have already understood that they have a young and promising new lord. From the moment the double-headed eagle flag of the Ximena family stood on the walls of Navarre City, they are no longer the people of the Principality of Norton, but the people of the Andal Kingdom, and the people protected by León Ximena, The Marquess of Anatolia. The people don't think there's anything wrong with this. The vast majority of people in this era do not have any so-called patriotism or national identity. It is difficult for them to even fill their stomachs on weekdays, so how can they think about these things? Even though the south bank of the Myrsin River is extremely fertile and is a famous granary on the south bank of the entire Norton Principality, the granary is the granary, and most of the grain grown belongs to the Lord. So in the eyes of the people, this is nothing more than a change of nobles riding on their heads, and life can still go on. What's more, compared with other nobles of this era, Leon's exploitation of the people can already be called kind. The heavy taxes to be paid have become less, and the various exploitations have disappeared. In addition, the young Marquess expelled the remnants of the restoration of the country entrenched in Navarre City. The people of the territory are naturally excited and smoothly recognize Leon's rule over the city. If it weren't for Leon, they would probably still be imprisoned in the dungeon, waiting for the disposal and whipping of those religious lunatics. So in a sense, the Antonians can even be regarded as the lifesavers of the people living in this city. As for the former Duke of Navarre, the servants loyal to the Duke of Navarre had been killed when the remnants of the Restoration captured the city, which saved Leon a lot of trouble. Seeing this elite army slowly passing through the city gate, the people in the territory became more excited. Who doesn't want to have a powerful lord? Anyway, the taxes that should be paid to the lord must be paid. With the protection of a powerful lord, at least they don't have to worry about being involved in the war all day long. What's more, the mental outlook of this army is obviously very different from any army they have seen before. Not to mention the strict military discipline and neat clothes, the elven longbowmen who are also walking in the team alone have brought a bit of legendary color to this army. Even the elves can fight for their lords, so Navarre City will definitely not suffer such a heavy blow again. Moreover, during the days when the Antolian army occupied the city, the new generation of local officials headed by Cland did not explain Antolian policies and laws to them. So, since they already knew that the young Marquess was going to wipe out the remnants of the restoration of the country entrenched in the southern part of the Principality of Norton, the people in the Principality naturally supported him 100%. When Master Lai came, there was a blue sky. When Master Lai came, Navarre City was peaceful. And now, not only was Navarre City peaceful, but Master Lai also wanted to bring peace to the people of Port Eider. Yes, after a week of rest, the purpose of Leon's trip was Port Eider on the west coast. As long as Port Eider was in his hands, the purpose of the Antolians' westward expedition would be a success. Unless there was a direct order from Wilbert I, or the situation in Norton suddenly changed, Leon would never cross the river to the north after taking Port Eider. Even if he had to go due to the situation, Leon's strategic goal would certainly change accordingly. He would never covet even an inch of land on the north bank of the Myrsin River. Since it has been decided to send troops to Eider Port, Leon naturally handed over the defense of Navarre City to Elm. After all, the locals of Navarre City, led by Cland, had just surrendered not long ago. Leon didn't think that if he stood in front, the people with different thoughts would be convinced. No matter how handsome he is, people's hearts are unpredictable. Therefore, there must be someone who can make Leon feel at ease to guard it personally. And Elm, a hardcore ruthless man who led the Antolian caravan to cross the Chillon River 3 times and was loyal to him, naturally became the best choice for the commander of the garrison in Navarre City. I will give you all the 1,600 militiamen sent by the Earl of Greywater Castle and the Viscount of Ram City to help in the battle. You must defend Navarre City for me. Looking at Elm, who rushed to the outside of the city to see him off, Leon said very seriously, "Please rest assured, Lord Marquess." Elm responded solemnly, "As long as Elm is alive, the flag on the wall of Navarre will never fall. The army from the north bank of the Myrsin River will never set foot on this land belonging to the Antolians." Hearing this, Leon no longer hesitated, and immediately turned his horse's head and led the army behind him to march towards the direction of Eider Port. Leon was very confident about this battle, because behind him, the Lapric Legion, the Antolian militia, and the Antolian mercenaries, the 3 main legions of Anatolia, all followed. That's more than 3,000 elite soldiers who have been on the battlefield and seen blood. If you add the other half of the conscripts provided by the vassals, 450 elven longbowmen, the army mages headed by Albert, and the hot air balloons floating in the sky around to scout the enemy for the Antolian army. To be honest, this is the richest battle Leon has fought since he crossed over. After these days of targeted clearing of surrounding towns and manors, the cooperation between the Anatolian army and the elven longbowmen has become more and more tacit. Not to mention that the people entrenched in Idleport are the followers of the Harpy. Even if they are the followers of the Harpy goddess, Leon will crush them all. Leon never doubted this. Do you think the remnants of the restoration of the country have any backup plan? The hot air balloon floating in the air ensured the safety of the Anatolian army during the march, and also allowed Leon to calm down and asked Albert on the side. Backhand. Albert was stunned for a moment. Yes. Those guys who claim to be the followers of the Harpy have never been wiped out for decades. This time, the civil war in the Principality of Norton has directly jumped out, so, this time, the troops to Idleport may need the help of the teacher. Leon decided to give Albert a shot in advance. Confidence is not the same as underestimating the enemy. The Duke of Galicia suffered an unexpected event because he underestimated the enemy and even trusted Leon. So even though he had sufficient confidence in the victory of this battle, Leon always kept a clear mind. After all, there are many kinds of victory. Complete victory, great victory, incomplete victory. All of the above can be counted as victory, but the price to be paid is completely different. Don't worry, Marcus. Although Albert always likes to ask Leon for a sky-high price on weekdays, this is the critical moment of this war, and Albert will naturally not let down the chain. Andal Kingdom, Essex. Just as Leon led his army towards the port of Eider, a team of cavalry from Anatolia had already appeared outside the city of Essex, the capital of Andal. You know, as soon as Anatolia captured the city of Navarre, Leon ordered people to send this news to the capital as soon as possible. As for the reason, of course, we have to thank His Majesty the King for his gift. Many things cannot be concealed. The news that the Anatolian army captured the city of Navarre will inevitably spread to the kingdom. So Leon planned to take the lead and shut up Wilbert I in advance. There was no way. Although Wilbert I's order was very clear, whoever conquered the land would own it, but Leon was unwilling to gamble with Wilbert I's credibility. If Wilbert I decided to exchange fiefs, using the other half of the vassal in the southern part of the Andal kingdom that originally belonged to the Duke of Galicia to exchange for the land conquered by the Antolians in the southern part of the Principality of Norton, wouldn't Leon have no way to say it? If he agreed, then Antolia's seaport would be gone. If he didn't agree, wouldn't Leon's image as a loyal minister of the kingdom that he had finally established be destroyed in one day? Therefore, thanking the king for the reward in advance, and then using various reasons to shut up Wilbert I's mouth, can ensure that the Antolians' achievements will not be wasted. After all, war is not just a simple battlefield fight. Money, food, population, strategic depth, and the deeper political game behind it, Leon needs to make sufficient considerations in any aspect. Fortunately, Aaron, the butler of the Ximena family, is roughly equivalent to Leon's external brain. The two of them carefully discussed before the expedition and basically filled all the foreseeable loopholes. Leon actually sent troops. When the messenger from Anatolia presented Leon's handwritten letter to His Majesty the King, Wilbert I's eyes widened. Although Leon had issued war bonds to raise money and food before the troops were sent, due to the current situation of information blockage, it was not until the messenger from Anatolia presented Leon's handwritten letter to Wilbert I that the king, who had just ascended the throne for a year, received the news that Leon had sent troops. In fact, before the start of this war, Wilbert I had also thought about the young Marquess, the loyal minister who lifted the siege of the capital. But, considering the barrier of the mountains, if Leon wants to send troops, he may have to go through the western part of the kingdom. Therefore, when issuing the order, Wilbert I did not consider the possibility of Anatolia sending troops. However, Leon sent troops anyway. According to what Leon said in the letter, as a vassal, he must solve problems for his lord and fulfill his obligations as a vassal. It was with this idea that the Anatolian army crossed the mountains in the southwest, like a dagger, and pierced straight into the southern hinterland of the Principality of Norton, and even defeated the remnants of the restoration of the country entrenched in Navarre city in one go, and occupied the city that originally belonged to the Principality of Norton. Well done. After confirming that Leon did send troops and achieved unexpected results, Wilbert I finally showed a hint of joy on his face. Wilbert I was a sober monarch after all. Moreover, the news sent by Leon at this time can be said to have completely swept away the irritability of Wilbert I in these days. As for the land in the south of the Principality of Norton, compared with that piece of land, It is more important for Wilbert I to let the Kingdom of Andal be qualified to share the cake of the Principality of Norton. You know, just 3 days ago, the nobles in the west of the kingdom also sent a war report. But what is different from the war report of the Antolians is, Leon's war report brought the joy of victory, while the news brought by the western nobles was the reality of defeat. The coalition formed by the nobles in the west of the kingdom, a huge army with more than 30,000 people, just stepped into the territory of the Principality of Norton, and was hit head-on by the Kingdom of Walrus. The number of nobles with the title of Viscount or above who died in this battle alone was in the double digits. The first battle was a complete defeat. How could Wilbert I not be angry? How could he not be annoyed? Yes, now he does have the right to inherit the Principality of Norton, but the right to inherit is only the premise for dividing the cake. Military strength is the guarantee to divide the fruits of victory and get a bigger piece of cake after the war. What's more, the so-called division of interests is only something that can be considered after this war. If the Kingdom of Walrus cannot be beaten back, if the remnants of the restoration of the country entrenched in the south of the Principality of Norton cannot be killed, then what is the use of just having a right of inheritance? So for Wilbert I, the war report sent by Leon can be regarded as the most useful news that Wilbert I has received this month. At this moment, in the heart of His Majesty the King, León Ximena is simply his lucky star. Chapter 199. My dear family members, provocation really works. The capital, Essex. At the imperial meeting held the next day, King Wilbert I of Andal gave important instructions on the current international situation. The westward advance of the Antolians opened up the situation for the Andal kingdom, which was a layman in foreign wars but an expert in civil wars. According to Wilbert I, it was like putting a hedgehog in the crotch of the remnants of the restoration and the walrus people, leaving them in the dilemma of being attacked from the east, west and south. As soon as the expeditionary force from the Principality of Pelusia and the coalition forces from the eastern countries arrive, the walrus people's plot will be wiped out under the three-sided attack, and the rampage of the remnants of the restoration will be curbed. Although the Brandon family, the rulers of the Principality of Norton, became history in this war, the territory of the Principality of Norton is still bathed in orthodox beliefs, and the situation in the northern continent is still developing in a good direction. And the Andal kingdom will surely have a more glorious tomorrow. To be honest, even Leon himself did not expect that the offensive of the Antolians would be so exaggerated by his own king. But if you think about it carefully, it is not difficult to understand. Whether it is the Kingdom of Idrid or the Kingdom of Andal, as the main forces that sent troops to the Principality of Norton, the previous wars did not achieve even the slightest results. The army of the Kingdom of Idrid smoothly transferred after the encounter with the Walrus army, and is still resting. The western nobles of the Kingdom of Andal were also hit head-on by the northern foreigners after entering the territory of the Principality of Norton, and retreated back to the territory of the Kingdom of Andal. In short, although everyone's slogans were shouted loudly and the postures were very strong, there was not even a little bit of real results to be seen. In this situation, Viscount Wilbert I felt embarrassed for the time being, and even the expeditionary force from the Principality of Pelusia and the coalition forces of the eastern countries gradually slowed down their pace. Who knows when they arrive at the battlefield, will they participate in the defense of the Principality of Norton or the defense of the Andal capital of Essex? Exclamation mark. Therefore, the victory brought by the Antolian army undoubtedly has a very far-reaching significance. Wilbert I even waved his pen and directly defined the fall of Navarre City as a turning point in the situation of the Principality of Norton. After a discussion at the imperial meeting, Leon's victory has been carefully embellished by the nobles of the Andal kingdom to the extent that even Leon has to call it an explosion. Anyway, after a long period of discussion, this victory has become a big chess game under the collective wisdom of the Andal nobles, operated by Wilbert I himself, and executed by León Ximena, the Marquess of Antolia. The number of remnants of the restoration of the country in Navarre City has increased from the 1,000 people originally reported by Leon to 10,000 people, and the original capture of the city has become the capture of the city and the annihilation of the enemy. Even the previous retreat of the Andal Western nobles was no longer a complete rout, but a strategic retreat to cover the Andal kingdom's southern offensive and paralyze the enemy. As for why it was the Walrus kingdom that was paralyzed, and the remnants of the restoration were beaten, the nobles of the imperial conference said that the water was deep, and only a wise monarch could see the connection between the Walrus kingdom and the remnants of the restoration in this chaos. As the executor of this plan, Wilbert I naturally fulfilled his promise and immediately recognized the Ximena family's claim to the southern bank of the Myrcid River, and granted Leon the title of commander of the Andal Kingdom's southern army. At the same time, he encouraged León Ximena, the Marquis of Anatolia, to make persistent efforts and work closely with the nobles in the western part of the kingdom to expel the enemy troops entrenched in the Principality of Norton as soon as possible. Jubal Harlan. How are the troops I ordered you to train going? Although Leon opened up the situation in the south of the Principality of Norton, it is clear that no one knows the actual situation better than Wilbert I himself. The western nobles have been beaten by the pagans from the north, so as the king of the Andal Kingdom, Wilbert I naturally has to show some attitude. At least, the pagans of Walrus cannot be allowed to bring the war into the Andal Kingdom. To be honest, the original march into Norman has been turned into guarding the western gate. The western nobles of the Andal Kingdom are still somewhat awesome. I have recruited a total of 20,000 soldiers. Although the number is not too large, if we add the kingdom soldiers who previously guarded the Valley City, it will definitely not be a difficult task to stop the cavalry of the Walrus Kingdom from entering the country. Seeing his own king asking questions, Jubal Harlan, as the military minister of the Andal Kingdom, quickly answered. Then send them to the king's border, and send another 300 elite knights to be led by you personally. If the Marquis of Anatolia can achieve enough results in the southern part of the Principality of Norton, the kingdom's western army must also cooperate closely. It must be said that the war report sent by Leon once again brought enough confidence to Wilbert I, who had originally stopped fighting. Although the western part of the kingdom is now in a passive defensive state, the kingdom of Walrus has made enemies everywhere, and it is also not easy. So even if the first battle was victorious, it only deployed troops on the border and did not launch further offensives against the Andal Kingdom. Now, the original two-sided attack has become a three-sided encirclement. This undoubtedly made Wilbert I feel that the advantage is in me. If I can delay for enough time, until the coalition forces from the eastern countries and the expeditionary forces from the Principality of Pelagia arrive at the border, I may really be able to reap more benefits after this battle. Yes. Seeing that the king had made up his mind, Jubal Harlan immediately accepted the order. However, the old military minister felt that his king's prediction of the situation was a little too optimistic. The Antolians were indeed good at fighting, but that didn't mean that the nobles in the west of the kingdom and the 20,000 conscripts he had temporarily recruited were also good at fighting. But the order had already been given, and he couldn't let His Majesty take it back. All Jubal Harlan could do was to defend the territory, and then hope that the young Marquis could achieve more results. Of course Leon would achieve more results. He had always been very confident in himself about this. And after 2 days of marching, the outline of Eiderport was already in sight. Compared with Navarra City, the walls of Eiderport were not actually high, and could even be called low. However, Eiderport was adjacent to the Endless Sea in the west and the Myrcid River in the north. In fact, the only two sides that could be left for the Antolians to attack were the east and south. There was definitely no way to sneak attack. The remnants of the Restoration Army entrenched in Eiderport had obviously received the news that the Antolian army was marching westward. Not only did they erect a lot of fortifications outside Eiderport, but even the unripe crops and the farmland outside the city had been burned to ashes by the remnants of the Restoration Army in the city. This is forcing us to attack. Looking at the port town not far away, Leon couldn't help but sigh. Don't worry, Marcus. Even if it's a strong attack, the Antolian army will definitely be able to take this town. Hearing Leon's words, Andrew said without hesitation. Let's set up camp here first. Eiderport has already been in our pocket. There is no need to let so many soldiers sacrifice their lives just to enter the city 1 day earlier. Leon shook his head and said in a deep voice. He would never regret his decision to rest in place in Navarre City. You know, in that short week, the soldiers of Anatolia rescued at least hundreds of thousands of ordinary people who were detained by the followers of the Restoration remnants in the surrounding towns and manors, and completely eliminated the hostile forces around the city of Navarre, leaving themselves a safe rear. If they continued to attack Eiderport at that time, they might have been able to take over the entire south bank of the Myrcid River while the remnants of the Restoration remnants were still unable to react. But what's the use of just taking land? By then, how many of the civilians imprisoned in the prison can survive? I'm afraid it really depends on God's will. The craftsmen accompanying the army took local materials from the forests south of Eiderport and made siege hammers, shield carts and other siege equipment with all their strength. As for you, Andrew. Leon paused and looked at the eager Legion commander. Arrange your soldiers to challenge outside Eiderport, and use words that can insult the Harpy. The statues and flags of the Harpy confiscated in Navarra City were all burned on the spot outside Eiderport, or soaked in urine. I want to see if this group of so-called devout religious lunatics will watch the gods in their hearts being insulted. Yes. Hearing this, Andrew's eyes suddenly flashed with joy. In fact, if the enemy in front of him was the walrus people, Leon might not do this. After all, if you urinate on the gods that are believed in, let alone the walrus army, even the ordinary people of Walrus will probably fight with the Antolians to the death. Even if they can achieve temporary results, there will be endless troubles. They will become the mortal enemy in the eyes of all believers, and there will be no possibility of reconciliation. However, Leon does not have to have such scruples when facing the remnants of the restoration of the country. The remnants of the restoration of the country. Even if you don't offend it, it will take the initiative to offend you. These guys have committed so many brutal bloodbaths in the northern continent, especially in the Principality of Norton and the Kingdom of Idrit. They are not good people, so insults are insults. There is no doubt that this is a very direct provocation. If the believers in the city really can't stand it and rush out, then naturally it will save the process of the Antolians attacking the town and building siege equipment, and they can directly compete on the plains outside the city. If you hold back, even if you watch the gods you believe in being insulted, you will not move, then Leon will naturally have other backups. He has already thought of countless battle methods in his mind. And, he also has a tallbird. The wild tallbirds living in the southwest highlands are of violent temperament, but the tallbirds hatched by the Antolians have been trained very well, and they are very hardworking in assisting the miners of Antolia to mine minerals. So when Leon decided to stay in Navarra City, he had already sent an order to the mayor of the mining town, Bello, asking him to find a way to transport dozens of tallbirds from the southwest highlands to the south of the Principality of Norton, so as to provide assistance to the Antolian army. The beak of the tallbird can even chisel hard rocks at once, and it is no problem to face the low walls and ordinary wooden gates of Eiderport. So Leon is not in a hurry. Just wait until the craftsman's siege equipment is completed and the tallbirds from the southwest highlands are in place on the outskirts of Eiderport. Sooner or later, the center of the city will be planted with the flag of the Ximena family. Damn it. Those damned Antorians. I will tear them into pieces, paint the walls of the city with their blood, and cook the most colorful blood food with their corpses to dedicate to the Great Harpy. Compared to the calm outside the city, Eiderport was already in turmoil at this time. Burning the image of the Harpy, nourishing the carving of the Harpy with urine, speaking arrogant and provocative words, and even comparing the gods in their minds to dirty worms. No matter which of the above, they are very accurate in stepping on the minefield of the remnants of the restoration. Not only the three cardinals who are now in Eiderport, but even the believers entrenched in the city, are furious in the series of curses coming from outside the city. After all, the remnants of the restoration really believe that the Harpy can bring them eternal life. Because in their hearts, the adults on the Moon Island have lived for many years, and the blessing of the Harpy is really true. Defend the city? What the hell? We must kill them. There seemed to be endless anger in Krapp's voice. This is the Antorians' conspiracy. Delon was also angry, but at least he was still somewhat sober, and he had to look at another bishop who had not yet spoken. Stay where you are, Eiderport. This is what we decided before. No one can insult the Great Harpy. Another cardinal said in a deep voice, the Antorians outside the city must pay the price for their words and deeds. Delon, are you going to betray your faith? Absolutely not. Delon Altus promised hurriedly. Then take people to kill. The Harpy will protect her believers. Delon knew very well that such a decision would make all the defense equipment previously arranged by the remnants of the restoration of the country useless. However, looking at the two colleagues who had long been swept by anger, Delon had no other choice in the situation of 2-1. So, in Leon's astonished eyes, the gate of Eiderport was slowly opened. Isn't it? These lunatics are so impatient. Leon looked at the suddenly opened city gate not far away and the believers rushing towards the Antolian army with a surprised face. Before this, he really just wanted to try his luck by provoking them. But he didn't expect that these guys would be so vulnerable to provocation. In that case, let's take this city in one battle. At this moment, a loud horn sounded in the Antolian army. Please subscribe. Chapter 200. There was a loud bang in the sky, and the elven longbowman made a brilliant appearance. Woo! The high-pitched horn sounded in the army, like a thunder before the rainstorm, adding a layer of grey to the vast plain. Under the provocation of the Antorians, the believers wearing brass harpy masks were already furious. After all, no one would have thought that those damned Antorians would do such a bad thing. They could not accept that the gods in their minds were insulted like this, and they could not accept the blasphemy of the harpy statue by the Antorians. So, in extreme anger, their steps towards the Antorians were completely unsystematic. From a distance, it was like a group of insects that suddenly jumped out of the mother nest and swarmed out in an instant. The brass masks reflected a bleak luster in the embers of the setting sun, and the weapons in the hands of the believers flashed with a cold edge. If it were the rest of the army, they would probably be frightened by these angry believers in front of them, and even find it difficult to have the courage to fight them. However, the Antolians' military formation did not change at all because of the enemy in front of them. Today, they are no longer rookies who have never seen blood. Needless to say, the Antolian mercenaries who have experienced hundreds of battles. Which of those young Antolian militiamen and Laprik warriors has not set foot on the battlefield? The invasion of the Plateau Hounds, the clearing of the Southwest Highlands, and even the civil war in the Andal Kingdom. It may be a bit exaggerated to say that they have experienced hundreds of battles. But each of them has definitely seen blood on their weapons, and most of them have been injured. Strict military discipline has made the most distinctive feature of the Antolian army. Leon never thought that simple obedience training could make soldiers invincible, but at least it could make soldiers understand the importance of following orders. So after experiencing the baptism of war after war, even if a group of mad dogs were running towards them not far away, they would never scatter like other noble private armies. Even the conscripts sent by the vassals to make up the numbers became eager to fight after knocking on a can of red bottles, without showing even the slightest fear. Claimante. Looking at the enemy troops pouring out of the town, Leon couldn't help but cast his eyes on the moon elf elder beside him. It's time to give your elven longbowman a shocking opening. Yes. Hearing this, Claimante's face was full of excitement. In a sense, this battle to attack Eiderport was the first shining appearance of the elven longbowman, and it was the solemn declaration of the elves' return to the mainland stage. Although the moon elves also took action in the previous night attack on Navarra City, under the cover of the dark night, the moon elves could not shine even if they wanted to. So when Leon led his troops westward and led the army to Eiderport, the people of Navarra City realized the existence of the elves. Therefore, for Claimante, this is an extremely precious opportunity. Shoot. With his order, arrows shot out one after another. At the same time, behind the elf longbowman, a shadow of the world tree suddenly appeared. Against the backdrop of the pale golden sunset, the lush green projection seemed to emit a little starlight, and even the elf longbowman seemed to be covered with a layer of light blue gauze at this moment. The power may not be enhanced, but the special effects must be gorgeous and cool. As an elder of the Moon Elf clan, Claimante is well aware of the true meaning of the first appearance. Therefore, when the elf longbowman launched the first round of volleys, the 144-year-old Moon Elf elder immediately cast the group atmosphere magic that would only be used during sacrifices. Those sharp arrows reached the eyes of the remaining believers of the restoration of the country in a flash. Even though they had just rushed out of the city gate at this time and were far from being within the normal range of bows and arrows, but this is exactly the strength of the elf longbowman. Even though they were extremely far apart, almost every arrow shot would take the life of a believer. 450 arrows meant nearly 450 people were hit. If it weren't for the long-range attack, which required the elf longbowman to spend a lot of time to charge, just a few rounds of volleys would be enough to wipe out the crazy believers. Even the knowledgeable Leon could only make a series of 666 in the barrage at this time, and began to think involuntarily about what kind of situation would he face if the Antorians were facing the long-range attack of the elves. The answer is simple: they must have full body armor or defensive equipment such as shield carts. Standing on the wall of Eiderport, Delon, the cardinal, was furious. There were only a few thousand believers in Eiderport, or to be more specific, there were less than 2,000 at most. One volley was enough to cause such heavy damage. Not to mention that the number of believers of the restoration relics was not large. Even the major kingdoms on the continent would not be able to withstand such a torment. Admittedly, such a huge loss was directly related to the believer's lack of protective gear, but now that the fight had begun, where could he find armor and protective gear? Fortunately, The enemy's sharpshooters seemed to have been collectively paralyzed after a round of volleys. Otherwise, let alone the chance of winning, it would be a problem whether the believers who rushed out of the city could rush to the front of the Antolians. Can't delay any longer. Perform a blood sacrifice. DeLong said in a deep voice, watching the extremely miserable battle situation not far away. If possible, he certainly hoped to hold on in the city. But in the case of 2-1, going out of the city to fight was a foregone conclusion. The believers of the Restoration relics had even rushed out of the city with a huddle and suffered the first wave of losses. So, hold a blood sacrifice immediately. Welcome the arrival of the Harpy. In DeLong's mind, this has become the only hope for victory. Leon stared at the town not far away. He felt that some kind of great terror was brewing in either city. It was a kind of magical atmosphere that seemed to be true but not true. Even though he was far away, Leon seemed to be able to sense an atmosphere that was very similar to ancient magic, and a pungent smell of blood. What are those guys doing? Leon couldn't help but frown. At the same time, a blood-red light gate seemed to appear in the sky above Eiderport. Isn't this a low magic world? Exclamation mark. Leon's eyes widened, and his right hand had already clenched his staff. A special kind of magic cyclone. Albert, the great wizard of Antolia, said in a deep voice, a kind of projection magic, which compresses and releases the magic in the air in a short period of time, and uses powerful spiritual power to open a light gate that can connect to thousands of miles away. But, this kind of thing is usually not very useful, and it cannot transmit any entity. Many years ago, the Church of the Andal Kingdom also used similar means to bring down miracles. At that time, the Church relied on the devout faith of the believers to form a light curtain that did not actually have actual magic power, and this one in front of me. Not only is the magic cyclone extremely unstable, it seems that it may collapse at any time. As he spoke, the phantom of the blood-red light gate suddenly began to tremble violently, releasing a repressive, gloomy and terrifying atmosphere, and blood-red rays of light fell from the sky and injected into the remnants of the restoration of the country who were rushing in the front. Shoot! Shoot! Claymante's roar came from the Antolia army. In an instant, the second round of volleys of the elf longbowmen finally completed the charging. Under Leon's gaze, the sharp arrows pierced the chests of the believers, but, unlike the previous fall to the ground, the believers who were shot by the arrows seemed to feel no pain at all, nor did they realize the blood rushing out in front of them. They seemed to have become ruthless machines, still rushing towards the Antolian army that was gradually closing in distance. Form a formation. Draw your swords. Prepare to meet the enemy. The shouts of the Antolian generals rang out one after another, and the elven longbowmen who were originally at the front quickly retreated, and the Antolian warriors formed a solid shield wall in front of Leon. Under the entanglement of those blood-red thin lines that fell from the sky, the brass masks on the faces of the remnants of the restoration of the country began to gradually sew together with their faces, and the eyes full of whites kept beating in the eye sockets, and even continued to ooze out bright red blood. The blood vessels on the faces and heads of the believers began to swell, like protruding tumors. Even the flesh and blood on their bodies became blurred and swollen in the process, as if they were manipulated and driven by an invisible force. So ugly. Leon gave a very objective and fair evaluation. Even though the soldiers of Antolia were well trained and had experienced wars, how could they have ever seen such a posture? Even though the consciousness of obeying orders had been imprinted in their hearts, the palms of their hands holding the weapons could not help but be soaked with sweat. Those guys, are they still human? It can't be delayed any longer. Leon looked at the thin lines that kept pouring out of the blood-red light gate, and immediately made a judgment based on the situation in front of him. At present, only the believers who rushed to the front had such a terrifying change under the entanglement of the thin lines. But the blood-red silk threads continued to pour out of the light gate. If this situation continued, the Antolia army would no longer face thousands of crazy believers, but a group of indescribable monsters. Moreover, there were already bursts of shrill wails in Eider Harbor, and the sky above the town seemed to be shrouded in an increasingly intense layer of terror and fear. According to Albert's previous statement, a few thousand believers could not form a magic cyclone of this scale. I'm afraid that the remnants of the restoration of the nation are using the fear of innocent civilians, killing and intimidation, to build the blood-red light gate that appeared above Eider Harbor. Only in this way can we explain the constant trembling and extremely unstable state of the light gate. Light. As the sun was about to set, above the Antolian army, A bright and dazzling ball of light was slowly condensing, like the rising sun, illuminating the vast plains and covering this increasingly strange battlefield. This was the magic that León had used when the Sami tribe attacked the Thorn territory at night that day. P.S. Chapters 55-56, facing the not-so-stable light gate, the strong magic fluctuations would inevitably destroy the structure of the magic cyclone and turn the blood-red light gate into nothingness. Perhaps León's power alone is not enough to break the light gate formed by the fear and shock of the bait of the three cardinals. But León at this time is no longer the León of the past, and Antolia at this time is no longer the Antolia of the past. While León was chanting magic, the close assistant priest fast, appointed by León, had already skillfully put a circle of gain on León's body. Counting from the bottom of his feet, there must be at least a dozen. If this is on the top of his head, he must be an archangel. As a great wizard, Albert pointed his magic wand at the sky above Eiderport. A straight column of magic light burst out from the top of his wand and rushed to the blood-red light gate in the air without any hindrance. Although they are both studying ancient magic, the results that can be achieved by the great wizard and the wizard are completely different. And this solid column of light is one of the results achieved by Albert. In fact, if it falls on a person, this seemingly solid beam of light will not cause much damage. After all, this world is ultimately a low magic world. Without chanting magic spells, no matter how majestic the beam of light is, it is no different from the magic factor that fills the air on weekdays. It is just that the magic factor is thicker, and at most it will only cause a little discomfort. But Albert's purpose was not to cause damage. León's light curtain is to cut off the blood-red threads that are shut out. And Albert's beam of light is to use the surging magic factor to disrupt the magic cyclone over Eiderport and fundamentally destroy the conditions for the existence of the light gate. In the near distance, the soldiers of Antolia have already engaged in close combat with the monsters. The shields of the Antolians faced the impact of the monsters directly, but this time, even the Antolian shieldman who was as strong as an ox could not help but stagger under this huge impact. The sharp blade slashed at the monster's vital points again and again, but the believers who originally only needed one blow to be killed were able to take the life of an Antolian soldier after being stabbed several times after turning into monsters. Fortunately, the light curtain held up by León cut off the blood-red threads falling from the sky, so that the number of monsters no longer increased with the passage of time. The magic cyclone in the air also trembled violently under Albert's continuous impact. I have a headache. Although I don't have a fever anymore, I don't feel completely well yet. I still have to go to the study room during the day, and my whole body is in a state of explosion. If there's anything unreasonable, you are welcome to correct me. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.